Back through the river of time, we return to the loving embrace of God Almighty. There in the heavens were the most radiant angels, shining like stars across the sky. They were magnificent, full of glory and power so beautiful that mankind could only bow in awe. But from that very splendor, pride began to take root, and with pride came downfall. Some of these angels betrayed the Lord himself, abandoned heaven, and chose forbidden love with the daughters of men. The consequence was the birth of a hybrid race, half divine, half human. They were called the Nephilim, giants towering, powerful, and bloodthirsty. They devoured mankind, conquered lands, and spread violence across the earth, until all families cried out in sorrow. The wrath of God was stirred, and he sent the great flood to wash them away. But did the Nephilim truly vanish, or do their shadows still linger in the forbidden pages of the Book of Enoch, in the faint memories of mankind? Tonight, as you close your eyes, join me in stepping into the darkness of history. We will turn the hidden pages of the Book of Enoch, where secrets of the fallen angels, the race of giants, and long-buried warnings await. And as always, the images you see are only illustrations to bring the story to life. Your task is simple. Close your eyes and drift with every word. Whether you're studying, sitting on a quiet journey, or lying down to rest, may this story be a blessing of peace. May it guide you back into the presence of the Lord, sheltered forever in his grace. The beginning, when humanity came to earth. Now, let us drift back with Sleep Codex to the dawn of time, when the Lord God had just created the heavens above the earth, below the trees, and every living creature. And now he turned to mankind. From the dust of the ground, he shaped the form of man in the very image of God himself. Then he breathed the breath of life into Adam's nostrils. And man became a living soul, shining with the eternal light of the Creator. And Eve too was brought forth, crafted from Adam's rib. Not from his head to rule over him, nor from his feet to be trampled under, but from beneath his arm, close to his heart, to be cherished, protected, and loved. The Garden of Eden was a vision of perfection. A crystal river flowed into 4 branches. Fruit trees bent heavy with sweetness, and birds sang in the pure air. Adam and Eve lived in complete joy, carefree and radiant, walking each day with God in the gentle breeze of the morning. But then, that perfection was shattered. With a single whisper from the cunning serpent, it told Eve that if she ate the forbidden fruit, she would become like God himself, knowing both good and evil. Tempted by its words, Eve ate the fruit and gave it to Adam. At once their eyes were opened, and they saw their own nakedness, and they hid from the face of God. This act brought their exile from the Garden of Eden, carrying with them the burden of sin, sorrow, and death. And yet, God did not abandon mankind. He still watched over every faltering step, even as humanity struggled to survive in a harsh and broken world. Day after day, generation after generation, the children of Adam multiplied upon the earth. Fires rose from small tents, flocks of sheep grazed the meadows. Life was simple, pure, and though filled with labor, it was marked by quiet peace. High above in the radiant heavens was another scene of glory. The angels of God, the Watchers, stood as guardians, shining like stars across the sky. They were sent to watch over mankind, to protect them, and to teach them to fear the Lord, guiding humanity's early steps with the law of heaven. The Book of Enoch records, "And they descended in the days of Jared. And so it was in the 6th generation after Adam, when humanity had filled the earth." These watchers, once charged only to observe and guard, became a vision that left men in awe. Their brilliance was dazzling, their majesty, like living stars in the night sky. People whispered that to behold them, even once, was enough to make a mortal heart tremble and bow in reverence. In those days, heaven and earth seemed to move together in one great harmony. And yet, it was in that closeness that something unexpected began to stir. Between celestial light and the fragile hearts of men, a forbidden attraction was kindled. The oath at Mount Hermon. In the beginning, when God entrusted the Watchers with their mission, He did not choose them for their strength or their wisdom, but for their absolute purity. In the heavenly realms, they knew only compassion, righteousness, and the will to protect the creation of the Almighty. In that place, love, desire, and any thought of lust did not exist. At first, the Watchers held firm to that sacred distance. They observed humanity from afar, silent eyes of heaven, never allowing any personal longing to cloud their duty. But among mortals, amidst their laughter, their warmth and their tender gazes, some angels allowed their hearts to waver. At first, it was nothing more than a fleeting thought, a whisper beyond the limits God had set. But in the laws of heaven, even a single impure thought was enough to stain their holiness. The moment that thought was born, their bond with heaven began to fracture. And once the line was crossed, in the mind action soon followed. In the hearts of the Watchers, a forbidden desire took root. They looked upon the daughters of men, fragile, radiant, alluring, and even the hearts of angels trembled. Eyes once meant for guardianship became heavy with longing. They no longer wished to watch from afar. They longed to descend to touch and to take. On a fateful night, 200 Watchers gathered upon the towering peak of Mount Hermon, a mountain that pierced the sky, a threshold between heaven and earth. The moon shone brightly, and the winds howled as if all creation bore witness to what was about to unfold. The Book of Enoch records, "Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations." At their head stood Giza, the mighty leader, though filled with fear. He dreaded that if he alone sinned, the punishment of God would fall upon him alone. But the others answered in unison, "Let us swear together. If we fall, then we fall as one." And so it was. 200 voices swore as one, echoing across the night sky, shaking the earth itself like a blade, tearing apart their sacred covenant with the Almighty. From that moment, Mount Hermon bore its name, the Mountain of the Oath, for there the Watchers bound themselves with a vow from which there would be no return. In that instant, they were no longer the guardians of heaven. They had become traitors, stepping onto a path that would bring ruin, not only upon themselves, but upon all of humanity. The Forbidden Unions and the birth of the Nephilim. When the oath at Mount Hermon echoed across heaven and earth, the Watchers could no longer turn back. Once majestic angels created by God to illuminate humanity, they abandoned the heavens and descended into the realm of man. They no longer kept themselves pure. Instead of watching from afar, they chose daughters of men fragile yet beautiful, with eyes, smiles, and warmth that heaven had never known. Thus began the Forbidden Unions. It was no longer pure love, but possession. No longer compassion, but desire in defiance of divine law. A sin shameful beyond words. And from these forbidden bonds, a new race was born, the Nephilim. They were neither angel nor human, towering like fortresses so powerful that even the mountains seemed to tremble under their steps. Yet with their strength came an endless greed. The Book of Enoch records, "And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells. They devoured all which the labor of men produced. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. The Nephilim consumed all the food of men. When the fields were stripped bare, they slaughtered the herds. And when even the animals were gone, they turned upon humanity itself. Their image was that of ravenous predators. Eyes burning red, hands like claws, their roars echoing so terribly that children screamed in terror and grown men collapsed in despair. Humanity lived in ceaseless fear. They hid in caves, abandoned their fields, surviving day by day, in dread for at any moment the shadow of giants could appear, crushing homes beneath their feet, devouring human flesh. The Bible itself bears witness to this horror in Genesis 6:4. In those days there were giants on the earth. the mighty men of old, men of renown. This was the dreadful price of forbidden love. Once angels fall, their brilliance ceases to be light and instead becomes a fire of destruction. And that fire swept across the earth, plunging mankind into despair unknown before. Consider this: human love, though precious and sacred, is still bound by self-interest. It clings to family, to chosen ones, distinguishing who is worthy of affection and who is not. But the divine angels, heavenly beings, were meant to transcend such limits, to reach the higher realm of compassion. Only compassion loves without condition, without choice, without distinction. As Jesus Christ came to earth to save mankind, he drew no lines between prostitute or commoner, rich or poor. He saw only the heart, and upon any who believed he poured out blessing. Thus, when angels abandoned compassion for desire, they forfeited their divine nature and became rebels against heaven. And from that rebellion, the earth was drowned in blood and tears. Humanity wept. The heavens shuddered. Worse still, the offspring of these fallen angels sought to lure mankind to their side, corrupting human hearts, leading them step by step away from the beloved God. Nephilim and the secrets of weapons and sorcery. When the Nephilim began to spread violence across the earth, the darkness did not come only from their brute strength. Some of the Watcher's angels, who were sent down to observe mankind, overstepped their bounds. They did not merely mingle with humans. They also revealed to mankind the forbidden knowledge of the heavens, knowledge never meant for mortals to possess. And among them, Azazel was the most sinful of all. The book of Enoch records that Azazel opened the very first forges among men. Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and the fabrication of mirrors and the work of bracelets and ornaments, the use of antimony and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones and all coloring tinctures. Picture, if you will, the stillness of the ancient night suddenly broken by the glow of red flames and the ringing clash of hammers echoing through the valley. From his hand, mankind learned to melt metal, to forge swords, to cast spears, to shape shields and armor. Once familiar only with crude tools, they now wielded weapons of destruction unlike anything seen before. And so blood was spilled not only beneath the feet of the Nephilim, but also between humans themselves. The earth was soaked with the mingling of hot iron and fresh blood. Humanity for the first time discovered destruction born from their own hands. But Azazel did not stop there. He whispered the secrets of beauty, not to honor the pure loveliness that God had given, but to stir up lust and vanity. Gold and silver were bent into bracelets, mirrors, and charms. Precious stones were ground into black coal powder to line the eyes and paint the lashes, turning a woman's gaze sharp and alluring. Glittering ornaments, bright colors, and painted faces drew hearts away from humility, trapping souls in pride and self-indulgence. Beauty became a snare. Desire became a fire consuming the soul. Nor was it only Azazel. Their leader, Semjaza, also taught mankind other forbidden arts. Charms, enchantments, root cuttings, and spells. Doors that should never have been opened were now forced wide. The weak sought to bind the strong. The greedy schemed to bend destiny itself. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cuttings. Armaros, the resolving of enchantments. Barakijal taught astrology. Kokabel, the constellations. Ezekiel, the knowledge of the clouds. Arachiel, the signs of the earth. Shamsiel, the signs of the sun. And Sariel, the course of the moon. And so the other watchers, too, scattered their fragments of perilous knowledge. Barakijal taught astrology. Kokabel revealed the constellations. Ezekiel explained the clouds. Shamsiel showed the signs of the sun. Sariel, the cycles of the moon. Instead of lifting their eyes to the Creator through the heavens, mankind began to bow before omens and fate. The result was inevitable forbidden knowledge, mingled with human ambition, weapons fused with lust, and the world sank into chaos. Humanity turned its back on humility and reverence for the Most High. And yet, if we look closely, that ancient picture does not feel so distant. Even today, humanity remains entranced by horoscopes, fortune-telling, and astrology, placing their fate in cards and stars instead of entrusting it to the Creator. People think they glimpse the future, but in truth, they chain their souls to fear and illusion. Just as Azazel once taught the forging of swords and armor, mankind today wrestles with another kind of knowledge, the right to bear arms. In many lands, the law calls it a freedom. And yet how often has that freedom turned to tragedy? How many thousands of innocents have perished because a weapon fell into the hands of the angry or into the hands of a child? It is as if the clang of Azazel's hammer still echoes and the sparks of his forge have never truly gone out. What once was called enlightenment often proves only a mask hiding the face of chaos. And as the Book of Enoch warned, knowledge without morality, without faith, soon becomes a new chain binding mankind to violence, desire, and superstition. The cry of humanity and the final judgment of God. Upon the earth, darkness spread. Villages once warmed by firelight had become battlefields. Sword clashed against sword. The cries of women and children pierced the night. Rivers ran crimson, for blood mingled with water. Beneath the feet of the Nephilim, humanity was crushed. Yet worse still, men slaughtered one another with the weapons Azazel had given them. In the distant mountains, no prayers rose any longer. Fires burned for rituals of superstition. Voices called out to the stars, seeking omens and signs. No longer did men lift their eyes to heaven, they bowed before false destinies. The earth groaned like a living being, gasping for its last breath. From the heavens, the Lord God looked down. His gaze was filled with infinite mercy and with immeasurable sorrow. He had given life. He had given light. He had entrusted to mankind the garden of paradise. Yet now they chased forbidden knowledge, bowing to lust and power. Tears divine fell from his eyes, and each drop thundered into lightning, awakening the universe. A silence spread across the heavens. And then, the decree was spoken. All the heavenly host fell upon their knees. 10,000 wings trembled the sound like storms rolling through the cosmos. Space itself blazed with holy light, while the darkness shuddered, curling in upon itself. The Lord summoned forth the 4 archangels, in whom he placed his trust. 4 pillars of light tore open the sky. 4 mighty archangels came forth before the throne, shining like 10,000 suns. Michael, the undefeatable warrior of heaven armor, gleaming like the sun, the sword of fire blazing in his hand. Raphael, the healer, moving within a halo of gentle radiance like flowing streams, yet eyes burning with the resolve of justice. Uriel, the keeper of light and knowledge, his face solemn, his eyes burning like the fire of 1,000 stars, piercing every shadow. And Gabriel, the messenger of the Almighty, wings stretched wide, voice like a trumpet resounding across the universe, before whom all the host of heaven bowed low. The voice of God thundered. The earth has been corrupted by the teachings of Azazel and his companions. Bind him in darkness until the day of judgment. Seize Semjaza and the rebels with him, and cast them into the abyss. And as for the Nephilim, let them turn their blades upon one another until the earth is cleansed. The archangels bowed low. Then they spread their wings. From heaven they descended like colossal stars falling from the sky. Their light split the night apart, piercing even the deepest corners of the world. The earth trembled beneath their wings. The seas roared. The mountains shook. And when their light touched the earth, nothing could remain hidden. The justice of God had come. No one could escape. No Nephilim could flee. No fallen watcher could conceal himself in the dark. The angels hurled themselves into the midst of the Nephilim. Swords of fire slashed through shadow, every stroke flashing like lightning across the heavens. The sound thundered like 1,000 storms, proclaiming that the hour of judgment had come, causing both the hosts of heaven and the legions of darkness to tremble. In that moment, the skies grew silent, as though creation itself waited. A silence sacred and terrible, like a funeral hymn for the traitors and a promise of salvation for all who still dared to lift their eyes to the Most High. The battle between light and darkness had begun, and mankind was on the brink of redemption. The Archangels carry out judgment. When the four beams of light struck the earth, darkness recoiled and trembled. Yet the Nephilim and the fallen watchers still roared in defiance. The heavens burned crimson like blood. The ground shook as though it would split apart. Michael was the first to charge. The fiery sword in his hand swept downward, cleaving the sky and striking the ranks of the Nephilim. Flames seared across their giant bodies, their roars shaking the mountains themselves. Yet no strength could withstand the warrior of heaven. With every stroke of Michael's sword, light tore through the darkness, and the ground beneath him blazed as though it had been cleansed. Raphael descended beside the blood-red river. He raised his hand, and a gentle emerald light spread like living water. The river of blood turned clear again. The cracked earth was mended and tender. Green shoots broke forth. Yet Raphael's eyes were not soft. He healed the land, even as he marked judgment upon those who had sown corruption. Upon a high mountain, Uriel spread his wings, shining like 1,000 stars. His eyes blazed, piercing every hidden shadow. He lifted his hand, and all the spells, sorceries, and forbidden arts of Semjaza and his companions ignited into ash. The doors of darkness they had forced open, slammed shut, sealed by the radiance of the stars. Beneath Uriel's gaze, there was no place left to hide. Gabriel stood upon a towering peak, his wings stretching wide, covering the sky. He lifted his voice not with mere words, but with the trumpet of heaven, resounding across mountains and seas, echoing into the very souls of men. The Nephilim quaked. The fallen watchers screamed. But to those who still lifted their eyes toward heaven, the trumpet was a promise. The Lord your God is one. Forsake superstition, return to the light. Repent before the final day comes. The whole world blazed with light. The earth shook, the seas roared, the mountains split apart. The Nephilim turned their weapons against one another, just as the Lord had decreed. Chains of radiant light forged from faithfulness, and the power of God bound Semjaza and the Watchers. Stripped of all strength, they were hurled into the abyss, where no light shines, no life exists, only eternal darkness and unending captivity. Azazel, the most guilty of them all, was buried deep within the desert of Dudel, a barren wasteland set apart for those who bore the gravest of sins. There the fallen angels were sealed by a sacred oath that cannot be broken. For countless ages they were left to isolation and regret, awaiting the final judgment of the Almighty. This war was not merely a clash of weapons, but a war between justice and betrayal, between light and darkness across the cosmos. It marked the tragic end of an age of false glory, and it stands forever as a warning to all creation. No one can escape the righteous hand of God. Yet the story does not end there. The fall of the Watchers was only the beginning of a greater chain of events stretching across ages and even the heavens themselves. The wound they carved into the order of the universe became a spreading shadow from earth to the very courts of heaven. Notably, the story of the fallen Watchers in the Book of Enoch is not just an isolated event, but the beginning of a larger series of cosmic upheavals that span ages and heavens. Their betrayal created a deep fracture in the order of the universe, a darkness spreading from the earth up into the heavenly realms. As the darkness spread, the forces of light were called to rise and defend the order of God. Michael, the Archangel of divine justice and power, together with the faithful host, would one day face Satan, the leader of rebellion, the one who drew countless angels into his revolt. The war in heaven, described in the book of Revelation, is the continuation and the culmination of the conflict between good and evil that began with the fall of the Watchers. It is more than a battle, it is the eternal symbol of the struggle between light and shadow. between loyalty and betrayal. Through the lens of both the Book of Enoch and the Revelation, we glimpse the greater picture. These sacred conflicts have shaped the destiny of both heaven and earth. On one side, the Nephilim turned their spears, their colossal blades striking against their own kind. Forests and mountains shook with their savage roars. Rivers ran crimson and corpses piled high like mountains. Every clash of their massive weapons split the ground beneath them, as though the very earth could no longer bear the weight of these offspring of heaven and earth. Meanwhile, frail humanity was swept into the whirlpool of chaos. They cried out for mercy, but their voices were drowned beneath blood and fire. The world was engulfed in violence, and the sky itself hung heavy as though it might collapse upon mankind. From the heavens, the Lord God looked down. He saw the giant offspring of the Watchers and humankind turning the world into a living hell. He saw the cries of the oppressed rising like a vast ocean. And he declared, "I will wipe away this corruption. I will cleanse the earth that mankind may be renewed in righteousness." Then the storm clouds gathered. Winds howled across the seas. The gates of the heavens prepared to burst open, and the earth, already stained with the blood of the Nephilim, was about to be submerged beneath the waters of judgment. Thus began the great flood. The Nephilim face the great flood and the power of God. The 4 archangels had completed their judgment. Michael had struck down the arrogant giants. Raphael healed the wounds of the land. Uriel sealed shut the forbidden doors of sorcery. Gabriel sounded the trumpet that declared the hour of reckoning had come. Their light blazed, but when their mission was fulfilled, the 4 angels withdrew, leaving the stage to the absolute power of the Almighty. From his heavenly throne, God looked down. He had heard the cries of humanity. He had seen blood covering the earth. And he decreed the final judgment, not a partial punishment, but a cleansing of the whole world. Then the heavens split open. Raindrops heavy as stones began to fall. Soon the rain became torrents, pouring without end. In a moment the world was swallowed in darkness, broken only by thunder crashing and lightning tearing across the sky. Waters surged up from the depths. Dry springs burst forth, gushing like 1,000 dragons hidden beneath the earth. Rivers overflowed, seas swallowed the shore's fields, and homes disappeared beneath the waves. Humanity fled in terror. Cries for mercy rose from every corner. Mothers clutched their children upon rooftops. Men grasped at branches, but roofs were torn away and trees uprooted in the flood. Their screams were drowned by the roar of the waters. Day after day, night after night, the rain did not cease. 40 days and 40 nights, the endless wrath of heaven. Mountains sank beneath the waters until only their highest peaks lingered above the endless sea. In the distance, even the mighty Nephilim could not escape the fury of the Most High. They roared in despair. These colossal beings, once towering like mountains, once the terror of the earth, now thrashed helplessly in the flood. Muscles that had shaken the world, feet heavy as pillars of stone, now useless as the waters rose to their necks. They swung their massive swords, slashing at the waves as though striking enemies. But the sea did not tremble. The waters swallowed their blows, mocking their mortal strength. They clung to cliffs, but the cliffs dissolved like sand. They climbed trees, but the trees tore free in the raging current. Some glared skyward, eyes blazing red as if to challenge the Creator himself. But lightning answered, splitting the heavens, and those giant bodies collapsed, swept away, vanishing without a trace. Though mighty and fierce, though once hailed by mankind as sons of the gods before the Lord Almighty, they were nothing more than weeds consumed by fire. The waters of judgment swept away every shred of their pride, leaving only the cold silence of an endless sea. The old world was erased. The violence, the lust, the arrogance of the Nephilim, all buried beneath the floodwaters of judgment. And in the silence after the storm, only one vessel drifted upon the boundless waters, the wooden ark of Noah, carrying the last breath of humanity, and the eternal promise of salvation from God. Why was Noah the only one saved? In an age of chaos, when mankind had fallen and the Nephilim spread violence across the earth, God searched the world for a righteous soul. And he found Noah. Scripture says Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. Amid a world corrupted by sin, Noah remained pure. He did not follow the sorceries of Semjaza, did not learn the weapons of Azazel, and did not worship the omens of the Watchers. He lived quietly, worked the land, cared for his family, and above all, he feared the Creator. Therefore the Lord called Noah and said, "Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence. But you and your family shall be saved. Build yourself an ark of gopher wood with many rooms, sealed with pitch inside and out. Bring into the ark every kind of living creature, male and female, so that they may survive with you. And bring food for yourselves and for them." From then on, though, the people mocked and laughed, though the Nephilim despised weak mankind. Noah continued patiently building the ark. The sound of hammer and chisel rang steadily through the years. That ark was not merely a vessel, it was the symbol of faith. Faith that God's word was true, even if the whole world rejected it. The ark of gopher wood was built with many rooms sealed inside and out, so that not a drop of water could seep through. It was 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. On the roof, there was a window for light on the side, a great door. And inside 3 decks for family provisions and all living creatures. God also instructed Noah to gather food for the journey for both man and beast, and to have everything ready 7 days before the rain came. On the appointed day, the animals came as though guided by an unseen hand. Pairs of male and female, the clean animals by 7s, and the birds also by 7s. The door of the ark stood open as Noah counted, and arranged each pen stocked grain, clean water, medicine, and oil lamps. And when all had entered, Scripture records that the Lord himself shut the door. The sound of the bolts sliding into place echoed like a divine seal. From that moment their lives were entirely entrusted to him. And when the waters of judgment rose, every mocking voice fell silent. Only Noah, his wife, his 3 sons and their wives, together with the creatures in the wooden ark, were preserved under the protection of God, inside the ark. 40 days and nights. The first rain struck the roof like hammers. The ark trembled. The first waves lifted it from the ground and slammed it down as though to break it apart. By the dim light of oil lamps, Noah gave out tasks. Some fed the animals, some replaced straw, some checked the ropes, some bailed out water trickling in through the cracks. They prayed with each crash of the waves, every prayer like an anchor, sinking into the dark sea. At night, thunder rolled like 100 war drums. The wind howled through the seams of the wood like an endless song. The ark groaned, but did not break, for it had been sealed with pitch, as the Lord had commanded. Some nights the waves rose like walls, tilting the ark until all clung desperately to the ropes. But slowly it righted itself again. Each time the timbers creaked, Noah closed his eyes and whispered a short prayer. "Lord, keep us." And the ark passed through another storm. The endless days seemed to dissolve into one another. They counted time not by sun or moon, but by the crowing of roosters and the rhythm of their prayers. The sound of animals breathing, children sleeping, and oil lamps crackling blended into a strange new rhythm of life. Outside, the old world was being erased. Inside, faith was sealed as firmly as the ark's closed door. When the waters reached the mountain peaks, the ark no longer crashed, but began to glide across the boundless sea. On calmer days, they opened the window above, letting in rare shafts of light breaking through the clouds. Sometimes the children laughed softly, and Noah smiled, knowing that even in judgment, mercy endured. And then one morning, the rain lessened. The waves grew calm. All listened intently. They knew the storm was passing. But Noah did not rush. He continued to pray, continued to care for the creatures, waiting for the next sign from the Lord. Finally, when the door of the ark was opened, light of goodness poured in. Noah and his family stepped out into a completely new world. There were no more cries of the Nephilim, no more clashing weapons, no more chants of sorcery from distant hills. Only the silence of a beginning. Noah knelt and built an altar of thanksgiving. The smoke rose to heaven, and God looked upon it with favor. He declared that never again would he destroy the whole earth with a flood. Then the first rainbow stretched across the sky. Not just the colors after rain, but a divine covenant, the eternal signature of the Creator, written across the heavens to remind all generations. From that moment, the fate of the Nephilim and the righteous stood forever apart. The Nephilim, giant, powerful, arrogant, were wiped away completely, for they had sown only violence and unending lust. Noah, small, humble, faithful, became the new root of mankind. That lesson has echoed through the ages. Whoever relies on strength to spread chaos will be destroyed by that very strength. Whoever holds to goodness, walks in righteousness, and fears God will find shelter and salvation. In the darkness of the flood, an old world died. But in the light of the rainbow, a new world was born, not built on the pride of giants, but upon the enduring faith of one humble man named Noah. And that is the reminder for us today. Amid the turmoil of the world, the choice between good and evil, between pride and humility, still remains. Whoever lifts their eyes to heaven will find the path to salvation. Did the Nephilim in the Book of Enoch really exist? Perhaps many of you still doubt, thinking giants are nothing more than myth. But after turning over hundreds of ancient documents, reading until the pages were worn, I can confidently say giants truly did exist. For more than a century, researchers have collected a wealth of evidence from across the world showing that humanity once existed alongside three distinct races of different sizes: giants, humans of average size like us today, and even little people. The Africanist E. Davidson once recorded astonishing details about this race of giants. With a single arm, they could block a river. Their voices carried so far, they could be heard from one village to another. When a giant coughed, birds scattered as if a storm had struck. They could walk hundreds of kilometers in a single day, then carry home elephants or hippos they had hunted without effort. But not only in Africa. An ancient Aztec manuscript preserved in the Vatican Library under the name Codex Vaticanus recorded that 4 generations of giants once lived on Earth. They were a unique people, descendants of a union between humans and divine beings. Courageous, extraordinary, sometimes carrying powers that none could withstand. Only after they vanished did humans shaped as we are today begin to appear. The German scholar Alexander von Humboldt, studying the writings of Dominican priest Pedro de los Rios, discovered another haunting detail. The Great Flood once covered the world, and only 7 giants escaped into caves. These, it is said, built man-made mountains in the form of pyramids to honor the mountain Tlaloc, which had once sheltered them and their tribe. What is astonishing is how closely these accounts match the Book of Enoch, the first place where the name Nephilim appears. As you may know, the Book of Enoch is one of the oldest texts connected to the Bible, once widely read among ancient Jewish communities and early Christians. Later, however, it was removed from the biblical canon and nearly disappeared until a copy was found in Ethiopia, and especially among the scrolls discovered in the caves of Qumran near the Dead Sea. The Book of Enoch tells a strange and unique story in ancient times. 200 fallen angels, called the Watchers, defied heaven's command, left the celestial realm, and descended to earth. They took wives from the daughters of men, and from these unions, a new race was born, the Nephilim. The Nephilim were unlike any other beings. They were true giants, measured in thousands of cubits, according to ancient reckoning. Old records describe them as not only immense in body, but also possessing great intellect and extraordinary power. More than 60 years ago, in the caves of Qumran, archaeologists uncovered over 900 ancient manuscripts. Among them was one remarkable scroll known as the Book of Giants. This text revealed clues about the downfall of the Nephilim. According to the book, the Nephilim had immense spiritual powers. They could perform feats of levitation, control minds, and see things from afar. Their words carried mysterious force. They could lift curses, heal sickness, even foresee the future. They mastered science, architecture, and engineering, building pyramids and monumental structures across the world. But the Book of Enoch also says they fell into corruption, drinking blood, teaching humans abortion, spreading violence, and defiling the earth. In the end, they were struck down by the judgment of heaven. Some ancient manuscripts even say the souls of the Nephilim could not pass on after death. Instead, they became wandering spirits, the origin of evil spirits in ancient Jewish tradition. Their existence created a crisis, unlike any other, so great that God decreed the complete destruction of the Nephilim through a great flood to cleanse the world. So perhaps the giants remembered in Inca, Aztec, Sumerian traditions, and in the legends of North American tribes are not merely myths. They may well be fading memories of the Nephilim themselves. A chapter both magnificent and tragic in the history of mankind. The Nephilim in other civilization. If the Nephilim truly once walked the earth, then memories of them are not only found in the Book of Enoch or in the scrolls of Qumran. Their shadow seems to echo in the myths of giants across many ancient civilizations. In Greece, we encounter the Titans, the first generation of giant gods, children of heaven and earth. Ancient accounts describe Titans so tall, their heads brushed the clouds and every step shook the mountains beneath them. They possessed dominion over the elements of the cosmos. Kronos could bend time, Hyperion ruled over light, and Oceanus commanded the seas. Yet like the Nephilim, their pride led to ruin in the Titanomachy, the cataclysmic war against Zeus and the younger gods which ended in their downfall. In the North Norse tradition, speaks of the Jotun, a race of giants dwelling in Jotunheim. They were said to be so immense that mountains could serve as their weapons. Many Jotun wielded ancient magic. Some could read the fate of the entire world. Others commanded ice and storm. A few were so vast that a single arm was the size of a ship, and their breath could whip across the plains as roaring winds. Though not all were evil, they stood in constant opposition to the Aesir gods and often challenged even Odin and Thor. Across the ocean, the Paiute people of Nevada tell of the Siteka giants with red hair towering twice the height of ordinary humans, with skin said to glow with a fiery hue. Legends say they were savage and cannibalistic, leaving footprints in the earth like those of monstrous beasts. Their roars sent birds fleeing in panic, and their strength allowed them to hurl boulders the size of houses. In the end, the Paiute tribes banded together, trapping the giants inside Lovelock Cave and sealing them forever in darkness. What is striking is that though these myths arose oceans apart, they share the same haunting motif. A race of giants born of mingled blood between gods and men, endowed with overwhelming strength and supernatural powers, but also consumed by arrogance. They could bend nature, wield magic, or dominate mankind through sheer force. Yet their end was always the same, cast down by the gods, destroyed by human resistance, or swept away by calamity, leaving no trace behind. Is this merely coincidence born of imagination? Or is it humanity's shared memory of the Nephilim giants who once existed, remembered under different names and myths throughout the world? Nephilim and the Archaeological. Scientific hypothesis. If mythology and the Bible both speak of giants, then does archaeology leave behind any trace of them? For more than a century, from the Americas to Asia, there have been countless reports of giant skulls and unusual skeletons unearthed. In Lovelock, Nevada, a place tied to the Paiute legends, there were discoveries of skeletons far taller than ordinary humans, along with strange artifacts that convinced local people that the Siteka, the red-haired man-eating giants, had truly existed. On the high plains of Peru, near Nazca, researchers announced the discovery of elongated skulls with volumes far larger than those of modern humans. Some scientists explained them as the result of head-binding practices. But others argued, even with head-binding, the cranial capacity could not be increased by half. Could these be remnants of a hybrid race like the Nephilim? Across Asia, from India to Tibet to China, local traditions also preserve stories of giant skeletons uncovered deep in the mountains or beneath the earth. Strangely, they were often quickly reburied or disappeared without a trace. And beyond bones around the world remain enormous footprints pressed into stone as if they were undeniable witnesses. In South Africa, on the Beld Plateau in Transvaal in 1912, a farmer named Storfel Koeze discovered a gigantic left footprint imprinted deep into solid granite. It measured 1.3 meters in length, 76 centimeters in width, and sank 15 centimeters into the rock. The toes were clear and proportioned, like a real human foot, leaving many to wonder, how could something as soft as flesh leave its mark in granite, a stone that takes millions of years to form? In Sri Lanka, in the 14th century, the famous Arab traveler Ibn Battuta recorded a colossal right footprint on the island of Ceylon. It measured 1.5 meters long and nearly 80 centimeters wide. By proportion, its owner would have stood over 10 meters tall. In local tradition, that footprint was regarded as evidence of a race of giants, or perhaps as the sacred mark of a god who once descended to earth. In Syria, at the ancient temple of Ain Dara, archaeologists discovered massive footprints carved into the very floor of the sanctuary. At the entrance lay a pair of footprints, and at the threshold of the main hall, a single footprint stood alone. What shocked researchers most was the distance between the two prints, nearly 9 meters apart. If this was truly a stride, the being must have been 20 meters tall. Looking closely, the impressions revealed toes, arches, and heels, in strikingly natural detail, not resembling sculpture, but as though a tremendous weight had pressed them directly into stone. Even in Vietnam, stories of giant footprints have been passed down for generations. On Mount Din, in Baria Vung Tau, a large stone near the path bears 2 footprints each, nearly 1 meter long, set apart at a distance, as though left by a giant striding across the mountain. Local people call them the footprints of the giant, while others believe they are the sacred marks of a god who once descended. In Duan Hung Phu Ta, on the banks of the Lo River, there remains a footprint about 90 centimeters long, so deep and distinct that the heel and toes are still visible. It is known as the fairy footprint. Folklore says it belonged to a god or immortal who descended to guard the river. But some researchers suggest it may be a cultural remnant from an age when legends of giants still lived alongside humankind. These footprints from South Africa, Sri Lanka, and Syria to Vietnam remain clearly visible in stone, enduring through countless seasons of sun and rain. They are not merely lifeless impressions, but seem like stone testimonies, whispering that a race of giants may once have walked the earth. Yet curiously, many archaeological reports like these, once appearing in local newspapers, were quickly dismissed by mainstream science, labeled mistakes or even outright hoaxes. Some believe this is because science is deliberately hiding the truth, for if the Nephilim truly existed, then all of human history as we know it would have to be rewritten. And perhaps it is this very silence that makes the name Nephilim all the more mysterious, like a shadow still cast over the memory of mankind. Father Carlos Miguel Vaca and the giant skeleton in Ecuador. If the footprints carved into stone are silent witnesses, then sometimes history also reveals physical remains. Bones so enormous they force us to ask, did the Nephilim truly exist? In 1964, high in the majestic Andes of southern Ecuador, a local Catholic priest named Carlos Miguel Vaca stumbled upon a discovery that could shake the foundations of human history. Exploring an archaeological site near the area of Changayminas, long called by local people the Cemetery of the Gods. Father Vaca claimed to have unearthed a giant human skeleton with bones unusually long yet strikingly human in form, said to belong to a being more than 7 meters tall. Though a Catholic priest, Vaca was also passionate about archaeology. He brought the bones back and preserved them in a small museum. He founded himself Museo del Padre Vaca. For decades, he displayed the fragments, drawing visitors and curious researchers from around the world. Photographs from that era show massive femur bones, an oversized skull, and rib fragments far larger than any modern human remains. Some even said they did not resemble the bones of any known animal. But the strangest part is this: after Father Vaca's death in 1999, the museum closed and the skeletons vanished without a trace. No carbon dating, no official excavation report, no published scientific study. Only old photographs, whispered stories, and a lingering silence still hanging over the place called the Cemetery of the Gods. Years later, some researchers returned to Chiang Minas, hoping to uncover more clues about the fabled burial ground of giants. Others remained skeptical, suggesting the bones may have belonged to large animals or to humans suffering from gigantism, exaggerated over time into legend. And yet the truth remains. No one has ever proven those bones were fake. And no one can explain why the local people had already named the site Cemetery of the Gods long before Father Vaca ever arrived. But Father Vaca's case is not the only story lost in silence. Across the ocean, rumors have long surrounded the archives of one of the most respected institutions in the world, the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. For generations, whispers have claimed that giant skeletons unearthed in America were quietly removed, hidden away, or even erased from the historical record. What could be so threatening about an oversized skeleton that it must be concealed? Could there be a secret buried even deeper than the bones themselves? Let us follow the trail further. The disappearance of 80 giant skeletons at Argedava, Romania. If in Ecuador, the giant skeletons displayed for decades by Father Carlos Miguel Vaca vanished after his death, then in Europe, an even larger story unfolded. In Romania, during what seemed to be an ordinary excavation, archaeologists stumbled upon an entire cemetery of giant remains, and then, just as suddenly, everything disappeared into silence. In the 1940s, during an excavation in the town of Argedava, the great stronghold of King Burabista of ancient Dacia archaeologists made a shocking discovery, a burial ground containing 80 giant skeletons. Local villagers served as the main workforce. One of them, Ionita Floria, now over 80 years old, still recalls the moment he uncovered a gigantic skull 2 to 3 times larger than that of an ordinary human. He remembered that simply placing it beside the head of a grown man was enough to make everyone shudder. Immediately after this discovery, all civilian workers were dismissed. A special research team arrived under an air of heavy secrecy. Locals said the remains were wrapped, loaded hastily onto trucks, and driven away in the dead of night without headlights. Armed guards stood watch, and several workers were warned never to reveal what they had seen. According to accounts, a total of 80 giant skeletons were removed, most of them nearly intact. Alongside them was found a colossal clay vessel so large that an adult human could crawl inside, filled with grain. Was this a ritual offering, or provisions buried for the giants of the grave? And then, everything vanished. No reports, no records, no scientific papers ever published. What caused those 80 giant skeletons to disappear without a trace? Could it be that someone deliberately concealed them because their very existence would force humanity to rewrite its history? The 10-meter skeleton and the buried Hyperborean tunnel. After the mystery of Argedava, it seems Romania still conceals secrets that can chill the soul. In 1976, at the Rocia, Montana, gold mine workers drilling deep into the earth stumbled upon a terrifying discovery. A giant human skeleton nearly 10 meters tall, lying in the damp shadows of an ancient tunnel. This tunnel, known as Tunnel Number 13, had long been shrouded in local legend. It was said to have been built more than 500 years ago by the Agathyrsi, a mysterious tribe once described by Herodotus, their hair dyed blue and their origins unclear. Over time, the story of the skeleton became a rumor. But in February 2012, a team of geologists tracing the gold veins ventured deep into the tunnel and uncovered a bizarre tombstone unlike anything known to modern science. Preliminary analysis revealed its composition: 55% carat gold dust, 15% granite, and 30% tungsten. A material blend beyond the reach of contemporary technology, as if it had been forged by a civilization far superior to ours. Immediately, the site was placed under total lockdown. The geologists were forced to withdraw. The 10-meter skeleton disappeared from all reports. Tunnel number 13 was sealed shut with steel and concrete buried forever. And once again, evidence of giants was erased, leaving behind only whispers and shadows. Villagers forced into silence at Skyeni, but the story does not end there. Turning back to the 1940s in the village of Skyeni in the Buzo Mountains, farmers digging to plant an apple orchard stumbled upon a strange, ancient necropolis. Inside were several giant skeletons, astonishingly well preserved. Alongside them lay fragments of pottery, intricate jewelry, and even metal statues about a meter tall, their form unlike any known human artwork. Such a discovery should have shaken the foundations of archaeology. Yet within days, a special archaeological team arrived. They swiftly packed up every artifact, crated the bones, and hauled them away in silence. No announcements, no records, no scientific reports. Since that day, the villagers have refused to speak about what they saw. Some whisper they were warned, others say they were threatened. A chilling silence has hung over Skyeni ever since. Were they silent because of fear, or because they were forced into silence? A media blackout by one who must not be named. That silence seemed to extend far beyond villagers. It reached the very heart of the media. In 2009, a Romanian local television channel prepared to air an investigative report about giants and secret tunnels beneath the Busegi Mountains. Everything was ready. The footage had been edited. But just before the broadcast, the phone rang. On the other end, a man's voice, hoarse, commanding, and utterly cold, delivered a warning. Stop investigating the Busegi Mountains. This information cannot be made public. There are certain structures in place to handle such cases. You do not want to know who we are, and you do not want to interview us. That is all I will say. The line went dead, and the report, once ready to air, never broadcast again. Is there an unseen hand quietly controlling all information about giants? And if so, why must the truth about an ancient race be hidden so thoroughly? Could it be that if humanity learned the truth, the entire story of our origins would have to be rewritten? Giant skeletons in the caves of Pulau, Upeh, Malacca, Malaysia. After the mysteries of Europe and the Carpathians, traces of giants suddenly appeared in a place no one expected: Southeast Asia. That place was Pulau Upeh, a small, uninhabited island off the coast of the ancient city of Malacca, Malaysia, long shrouded in local legends, hidden among coastal jungles. Pulau Upeh was known mostly as a nesting ground for sea turtles. Yet in late 2016, Malaysian media was shaken by startling news. Researchers had discovered giant human remains inside a cave on the island. At the center of the story was Mohd Fuad Kusari M., said a historian commissioned by the Malacca state government to survey potential historical sites. While exploring Pulau Upeh with his team, Fuad reported finding unnaturally large human bones protruding from the cave floor alongside two massive stone graves, each measuring about 5 meters long and half a meter wide, located some 1.2 kilometers from the cave entrance. Based on the size of the skull and bone structure, Fuad estimated the individual could have stood between 3 and 5 meters tall, a figure far beyond the normal anatomical limits of modern humans. The news spread quickly, drawing both public fascination and scholarly debate. Some experts, such as Dr. Mohd Jamil Mukmin of the Institute of Malaysian History and Patriotism Studies, noted that large graves had also been found on nearby Pulau Besar, believed to be the resting places of great religious figures. Still, he cautioned, the size of a grave does not always equal the size of the body. It may instead symbolize reverence or reflect a spiritual ritual. Even so, the Pulau Upeh discovery left a deep impression, for the sheer scale of the bones Fuad described could not easily be dismissed. Could it be that Southeast Asia too once bore the footprints of the Nephilim, or another forgotten race of giants? Evidence of giants in Romania. Yet Malaysia is not the only land whispering such stories. In Romania, the evidence of giants is even more abundant, so widespread that it seems woven into the very soil of the country. In the village of Scaieni in the Buzău Mountains, farmers digging to plant an apple orchard uncovered giant skeletons, more than 3 meters tall, along with fragments of pottery jewelry and strange metal statues nearly 1 meter high. During the 1940s and 1950s, other excavations in Romania revealed as many as 80 giant skeletons, many remarkably well preserved with estimated heights ranging from 4 to 5 meters. And in October 1989, yet another discovery surfaced: 20 additional giant skeletons unearthed at Pantelimon Labada near Bucharest. Strangely, the finds were not confined to one place. Reports of giants emerged from across Romania. Scaieni in Buzău, Mariuta in Calaraș, the Persani Mountains, Polovragi, Piatra Craiului, Tara Hategului, Cetățeni beneath the Negru Voda Monastery, and many others. If one were to draw these points on a map, Romania would appear like a vast lattice of giant heritage sites. A network of clues stretching across valleys and mountains, painting the outline of a hidden history that still waits for answers. Cap d'Oie, the mysterious two-headed giant. After the giant skeletons unearthed across Europe and Asia, and the legends handed down through countless generations, the world still holds a story so strange, it seems to defy imagination. It is the tale of Cap d'Oie, the two-headed giant, one of the rare cases clearly recorded in history. According to folklore, the story began in 1673, when a group of Spanish sailors sailing along the coast of Patagonia in South America encountered a towering figure. He stood over 3.5 meters tall, human in form, yet possessing 2 fully formed heads. Cap d'Oie was captured bound and imprisoned in the ship's hold. But his strength was beyond human measure. In a single night, he broke free from his chains, wounded many of the crew, and according to accounts, killed at least 4 men before being brought down by a spear driven straight through his chest. At first, his body was cast into the sea, seemingly lost forever. Yet, as if guided by some unseen hand, the corpse of Cap d'Oie washed ashore where it was discovered by local inhabitants. To them, he was not a monster, but a sacred being. They carried him back and venerated him as a god. Time passed, and the tale of Cap d'Oie drifted into obscurity. But fate brought it back once more. In the 19th century, the mummified body of Cap d'Oie suddenly appeared in England, purchased by a circus owner and displayed publicly. For nearly half a century, it drew vast crowds at the Blackpool Museum, becoming one of Europe's most sensational curiosities. By the 1950s, Cap d'Oie's mummy crossed the ocean again, this time to the United States. Today it resides in Bob's Sideshow, a private museum and antique shop in Baltimore, Maryland, owned by Robert Gerber and his wife. What shocks visitors is that the mummy remains intact, standing over 3.5 meters tall with 2 perfectly joined heads and a balanced, proportionate body. There are no signs of tampering or stitching, at least according to those who keep it. The story of Cap d'Oie continues to send shivers down the spine. From ancient records in South America to written accounts in Europe, and now a preserved mummy in America, every thread seems to point to the same unsettling truth: giants once walked the earth. They were not products of imagination, not mythical beings conjured in legend. They walked, they fought, and they lived alongside humanity as part of a history that seems to have been deliberately erased from the official record. In fact, countless excavations around the world have uncovered evidence of giants. And yet, time after time, those discoveries are quickly hidden, restricted or made to vanish entirely from scientific archives. Is all of this mere coincidence? Or is there a deeper truth, one so immense, so disruptive, that it has been deliberately concealed, a truth that could change forever how humanity understands its own origin? Why is information about giants being hidden? For centuries, reports of giant human remains have surfaced all over the world. Yet strangely, whenever someone announces the discovery of a giant skeleton, the evidence seems to vanish almost immediately. Archaeological sites are hurriedly covered up, leaving nothing behind for the public to see, while local witnesses fall silent, as if pressured by an invisible hand to forget what they had seen. Inevitably, suspicions arose. Could there be a powerful organization deliberately erasing all traces of giants? And when researchers followed the trail, one name surfaced again and again: the Smithsonian Institution. Smithsonian, a guardian of knowledge or a keeper of secrets. The Smithsonian Institution was founded with the stated purpose of the increase and diffusion of knowledge. Joseph Henry, its first director, envisioned it as a prestigious center of scientific research. By 1842, after the United States Navy completed its 4-year voyage around the globe, hundreds of thousands of zoological, botanical, geological, and cultural specimens were brought back and deposited into the Smithsonian's collections. These were further enriched by expeditions into the American frontier and surveys for the Transcontinental Railroad, which added Native American artifacts and specimens of newly encountered species. This vast treasure of knowledge soon made the Smithsonian one of the most respected scientific centers in the world. By the 1850s and 1860s, it had attracted the attention of leading naturalists, giving birth to the so-called Megatherium Club, a gathering place for intellectuals and scholars of the age. The Smithsonian quickly became a symbol of American science and learning. Its power, however, was not limited to science. At the very top of the institution sits the Chancellor, none other than the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. The Board of Regents consists of 17 members. 8 of them are government officials, including the Vice President, 3 senators, and 3 representatives. The remaining 9 are appointed by Congress. In this way, the Smithsonian is not merely a scientific institution. It is deeply bound to the political structures of America's highest authority, giants and the conflict with evolution. Yet because it guards official knowledge, the Smithsonian views the existence of giants as a heresy that cannot be tolerated. The institution has long promoted its human evolution timeline, interactive and educational product rooted entirely in Darwinian theory. According to this view, humanity emerged less than 10,000 years ago, evolving step by step from animal ancestors. But if giants truly walked the earth tens of thousands of years ago, beings of a size far beyond modern humans, their very existence would deliver a crushing blow to evolutionary theory. It would shatter the foundation upon which mainstream academia has built its narrative for centuries. And so, according to many sources, the Smithsonian did not hesitate to destroy thousands of giant skeletons that were sent into its custody. All of it done, it is said, to protect the wall of evolution from being torn down. Allegations of concealment. Some reports even claim that the U.S. Supreme Court once pressured the Smithsonian to release secret documents from the 1990s, including evidence of the destruction of giant remains. But to this day, silence prevails. No records have been made public. No bones have been returned to the people. In earlier times, when information technology was still limited, humanity's understanding of the world was shaped by only a handful of publishers and media outlets. In such a one-sided world of information, it was nearly impossible to know what was truth and what was deception. Giants, therefore, were conveniently relegated to the realm of myths and legends when the truth begins to emerge. But times have changed. The age of the internet and multidimensional information has opened a door allowing us to glimpse fragments of knowledge long hidden. And it is shocking to realize that what we once believed to be absolute truth, such as the theory of evolution, may in fact be nothing more than a carefully constructed veil upheld by a handful of scientists and powerful institutions to protect their own interests. The story of giants has suffered the same fate. Only 20 years ago, their existence was dismissed as fantasy. Yet today, with abundant evidence, eyewitness accounts, and archaeological findings, a different picture has emerged. Giants did not belong only to myth. They once walked this earth, living, breathing, and leaving their mark in ages long past. If the existence of giants has truly been buried in silence for centuries, then we are compelled to ask an even greater question. Could the most magnificent monuments in human history also bear their mark? From giant skeletons that vanished without a trace, to sealed-off caves, to the silence of powerful institutions, everything seems to suggest one possibility, that humanity may not have been the sole architect of ancient civilization. And among all these wonders, none stirs more debate than the Great Pyramid of Giza. The colossal marvel rising from the sands of Egypt, still defying every attempt of modern science to fully explain its creation. Could it be that the giants themselves left behind this masterpiece as an eternal testament to their existence? Did giants build the Great Pyramid of Giza? Pause for a moment and ask yourself, how could the ancient people said to have only primitive tools of wood and copper lift and position stones weighing tens, even hundreds of tons? How could they transport millions of such blocks across long distances and set them so precisely that not even a blade of metal can slip between them? The Great Pyramid of Giza, along with the colossal foundation of the temple at Baalbek in Lebanon, stands as undeniable evidence of this paradox. Even modern science, with its cranes machines and advanced technology, has not yet been able to replicate such scale and precision. So how could a so-called primitive society have achieved what seems impossible? The Great Pyramid is astonishing not only for its size, but also for its celestial alignment. The three largest pyramids line up perfectly with the three brightest stars in Orion's belt, symbols of rebirth in ancient Egyptian belief. Such precision is unlikely to be mere coincidence. It feels more like a message deliberately encoded by an intelligence far beyond its time. This immense monument was built from 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing an average of 50 tons. At completion, it stood 146.5 meters tall, the oldest of the seven wonders of the ancient world and the only one still standing today. Scientists admit how those stones were quarried, transported, and set into place remains an unsolved mystery. But if we consider the hypothesis of giants, the pieces of the puzzle begin to fit. With their enormous stature, the sons of Gaia would have had a physical advantage, unimaginable to ordinary men, capable of lifting, moving, and placing stones that we can barely comprehend. As historian Hans Ferdinand Helmholtz wrote in World History 1901, the construction of these great pyramids without modern resources and knowledge seems impossible by mere human strength. The popular belief is that these colossal works were in fact built by giants. Legend has it that the Great Pyramid of Giza was not merely a grand architectural achievement of mankind, but a reflection of a heavenly realm known as the celestial world. The master of this realm was said to be the celestial Buddha, whose sacred temple was described as a golden tower, radiant and resplendent, shimmering with pure light that bathed all beings in the heavens. Its base was a perfect square rising on four sides into flawless triangles, a structure of balance and harmony, glowing with a light so pure it seemed to nourish all existence. The people of old believed that the earthly pyramid was nothing more than an immortal replica of that sacred tower, a divine monument built to honor the Holy One, the being who could rescue all of humanity from the suffering of the mortal world. And if these stories still leave room for doubt, archaeology itself adds new layers of mystery. In 1988, during a research trip in Egypt, explorer Gregor Spory discovered a gigantic human finger measuring over 30 centimeters in length. Some suggested it could have been the remnant of an accident during the building of the pyramids. Scientific estimates, however, calculated that such a finger would have belonged to a body nearly 5 meters tall, a scale far beyond the limits of modern humans. Ancient Egyptian texts also spoke of an age when giants walked the earth. Their temples and tombs still preserve striking images, murals depicting towering figures as tall as a giraffe, or illustrations of giants carrying 2 massive stone blocks at once during the construction of the pyramids. It is important to remember that ancient art was the truest language of the past. The Egyptians carved what they saw with their own eyes, leaving behind testimonies etched in stone. These were not mere flights of imagination, but vivid records of a reality they once witnessed. Perhaps these depictions are a reminder that a race of giants may indeed have existed, and that they could have been the true architects behind Egypt's eternal wonders. Looking back at all the scattered evidence across the world, from Turkey to Ecuador to the ancient sites of Egypt, we see that they all converge on the same possibility: giants truly existed. And if they once walked the earth with strength far beyond that of ordinary humans, then raising the Great Pyramid of Giza or other megalithic monuments would have been to them no more difficult than building a simple house is to us today. Thus, the hypothesis that giants were the true architects of these eternal wonders is no longer absurd. On the contrary, it stands as the most reasonable explanation for mysteries that modern science even now remains powerless to solve. Did giants build the Temple of Jupiter? If the Great Pyramid of Giza leaves humanity baffled with its impossible precision and colossal stones, then the Temple of Jupiter at Baalbek, Lebanon, takes that bewilderment to an entirely new level. Rising from the Vaca Valley, once a sacred center of Roman worship, the temple is not only admired for its grandeur, but feared for the riddle it holds: stones of such magnitude that no one can explain how they were ever placed. Most mysterious of all are the 3 legendary blocks at the temple's foundation, known as the Trilithon. Each block measures more than 19 meters long, 4 meters high, nearly 4 meters thick, and weighs between 800 and 1,000 tons. Pause and imagine 1,000 tons. That is the weight of more than 130 full-grown elephants. Even today, with modern cranes and advanced engineering, cutting, moving, and setting such blocks at that height would be nearly impossible. And yet around them lie dozens of other blocks, weighing between 400 and 600 tons, fitted so precisely that not even a blade of grass can slip between them. So the question thunders across time: how did the ancients accomplish this? No ancient text records the construction method. No trace of cranes, pulleys, or transport systems exists from that era. Scholars have suggested theories: armies of slaves, massive levers, rolling stones, but each theory collapses before the same immovable obstacle. How could blocks weighing hundreds of tons be dragged across rugged hills and lifted into place without modern machines? It is here that a provocative and haunting hypothesis arises, one increasingly echoed by independent researchers. Perhaps the builders of Baalbek were not ordinary men at all. Perhaps they were giants, beings of staggering strength and knowledge far beyond what modern humanity can comprehend. The idea is not without roots. Ancient Lebanese tradition speaks of the giants of the valley, towering beings who once lived in harmony with humans before vanishing without a trace. For centuries, the people have called Baalbek the city of giants, where gods descended from the heavens, bearing stones from the sky and raising temples that bridged earth and heaven. And then comes the most piercing question: why does no other Roman structure show the same technique? If the Romans truly built the Temple of Jupiter with their own technology, why was such mastery never repeated in the Colosseum, in the aqueducts, in any of their other works? Why is Baalbek the one and only place where such impossible stones exist? Stones that outstrip the entire known capacity of the Roman world. So we are left with a troubling possibility. Was the Temple of Jupiter truly Roman, or was it a monument far older, born of a forgotten civilization of giants upon whose immortal foundation the Romans merely built their shrine? Where did giants once live? Throughout human history, the legend of giants has never been confined to one culture or continent. On the contrary, from east to west, from north to south, from icy mountains to endless deserts, traces of a race far greater in size and strength than humankind appear everywhere. If we gather these fragments into a single map, their footprints stretch across the entire planet like a shared chapter of history that modern civilization has tried to erase. The story begins in the Middle East, where the Bible first spoke of them. In Canaan, the land was said to belong to the Nephilim. The scouts of Moses returned trembling. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Numbers 13:33. In Egypt, temple walls depicted towering figures lifting stones and raising pillars, while Mesopotamian tradition told of the Anunnaki giant beings who left behind knowledge of astronomy and architecture. From the Middle East, the trail leads to Europe. In Greek mythology, the Titans and Gigantes were colossal beings who waged war against the Olympian gods. In the icy North Norse myths spoke of the Jotun giants of frost and chaos, eternal rivals of Asgard. And in Romania, discoveries from the 20th century reported dozens of skeletons measuring 4 to 5 meters in height unearthed at Argedava and Skyeni, only to vanish without a trace once officials intervened. If Europe and the Middle East left us with myths, Africa preserved physical imprints carved into stone. In 1912, on the Transvaal Plateau of South Africa, a giant footprint measuring 1.3 meters long was found pressed deep into solid granite. Local lore also told of giants whose voices carried across valleys, whose coughs sent birds scattering like storms, and who could carry a hippopotamus as lightly as a hare. Traveling further east to Asia, the story takes on new forms. In India and Tibet, ancient texts spoke of the Rakshasas, giant beings both feared and reviled. In China, the classic of mountains and seas described tribes of giants living in distant mountains. Even in Vietnam, legends remain etched in stone on Nui Ding in Baria Vung Tau. 2 footprints nearly 1 meter long still lie upon a rock, while in Duan Hung Phu Ta by the Low River, there remains the fairy footprint, a 90-centimeter imprint believed to mark the descent of a god guarding the waters. Crossing the Pacific into the Americas, myth and archaeology converge once again. Among the Paiute of Nevada tales speak of the red-haired giants known as Site Ka, and at Lovelock Cave, remains of unusually large skeletons were indeed unearthed. In South America, the Aztec, Inca, and Maya all recorded the existence of earlier races of giants. In Ecuador, Father Carlos Vaca displayed a skeleton 7 meters long in his private museum for decades. And deep in the Amazon, stories still whisper of the city of giants hidden in the jungle ruins. Even remote islands were not exempt from their presence. On Sri Lanka, the Arab explorer Ibn Battuta described a colossal footprint 1.5 meters long, revered by locals as the mark of a god. And far out in the Pacific on Easter Island, the Moai statues stand like eternal sentinels, massive stone figures whose very existence still defies modern explanation. Taken together from Canaan and Egypt to Greece, and the icy north from South Africa, India and China, to the Americas and distant islands, all these fragments tell the same story. Giants were not just legend, they once walked the earth alongside humankind, in ages long forgotten. And so the final question is no longer, did they exist? But rather, why has official history worked so hard to erase them from our collective memory? Perhaps hidden within those suppressed secrets, the truth about giants is the very key that would force us to reconsider the origins of humankind itself. Rediscovering the true origin of humanity. In Darwin's theory of evolution, once upheld as scientific truth, humanity was said to have begun as tiny creatures in the sea, crawling onto land, as amphibians transforming into reptiles, then apes, and finally into modern man. But today, after more than a century, countless cracks have appeared in this theory. Scientists have begun to admit that there are qualities in humans no animal no matter how many millions or billions of years it might evolve, could ever attain. Humans ponder philosophy. They seek meaning. They lift their eyes to the heavens and ask about their own origin. No blind chain of animal evolution could ever produce such qualities. Clearly, we are not merely the descendants of apes, and so the great questions return echoing through time. Who are we truly? Where did we come from? And where are we destined to go? The answers are not confined to laboratories, but have been whispered through the myths and sacred histories of every culture. When we trace back through the legends of the world east and west, north and south, we find something astonishing. Every civilization believed that mankind was created by divine beings. In Greek mythology, it was Prometheus the Titan who defied Zeus, who shaped man out of clay and gifted him with fire. In Jewish and Christian tradition, it was Jehovah the Almighty Creator who spoke the universe into existence and then personally breathed the breath of life into a form of dust, giving birth to Adam. In the ancient legends of the East, the goddess Nuwa molded mankind from golden earth, imparting to them both soul and life. Though the details differ, all of these stories share a single truth. Human beings were created by the divine, carrying within them the sacred imprint of heaven. And the gods did not merely create and abandon. They cherished mankind as their firstborn children of the cosmos. They protected them in their fragile beginnings, gave them knowledge, fire language, and taught them how to survive through the dangerous dawn of creation. The Bible's account of Adam and Eve illustrates this vividly. After 6 days of creation, Jehovah declared, "Let us make man in our image." From the dust of the earth, he formed Adam, and into his nostrils, he breathed the breath of life so that clay became a living soul. The name Adam in Hebrew means earth or clay, a reminder that though our bodies are of the ground, our life itself is the breath of God. Then, he placed Adam in the Garden of Eden, a paradise filled with fruit, light, and life. Adam was permitted to eat from every tree except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Seeing that Adam was alone, the Lord took one of his ribs and formed Eve, the first woman. From that moment, humanity knew love, companionship, and the bond of family. To complete Eden, God also created the birds of the sky and the animals of the earth, so mankind would not dwell in solitude. This is the sacred beginning of humankind in the Judeo-Christian tradition. It stands as testimony that humanity is not the product of blind evolution, but a unique creation breathed into being, cherished and entrusted with divine purpose. Greek mythology. Prometheus creates mankind. After the story of Adam and Eve, in the Bible we turn to another account from the West Greek mythology, where the origin of mankind is told in a very different yet equally sacred way. In those ancient days, when the earth was still in chaos upon Mount Olympus, two Titan brothers, Prometheus and Epimetheus, were entrusted by Zeus to shape the world and bring forth life. Epimetheus quickly molded countless creatures from clay, some with claws, some with wings, others that could swim or climb. But Prometheus was not satisfied. He longed to create a being unlike any other one that could truly rule the earth. For 12 days and nights, he labored shaping clay and water until finally, he created man in the likeness of the gods themselves. Yet he did not stop there. To ensure mankind would stand apart from the beasts, Prometheus bestowed upon them qualities of the divine. And daring even further, he stole fire from Zeus and carried it down to the earth, gifting it to his beloved creation. Fire lit their nights, warmed their homes, and opened the path to civilization itself. Zeus grew furious at such defiance. To punish Prometheus, he commanded the gods to create Pandora, the first woman radiant in beauty, yet bound to a fateful destiny. Athena granted her skill and wisdom, Aphrodite bestowed upon her irresistible charm, and each god contributed something of their own until Pandora stood as a flawless creation. It was Pandora, together with her fateful jar, who would one day bring both calamity and hope to mankind. Thus, in Greek mythology, humanity, both man and woman, came into being. They were shaped from clay, yet gifted with fire and divine qualities, and from that moment they multiplied, advanced, and laid the foundations of human society. Eastern mythology, Pangu, separates heaven and earth, and Nuwa creates humanity. While Prometheus was honored as the father of mankind in the West, the ancient East also preserved stories of cosmic creation and the birth of humanity. In the beginning, the universe was chaos enclosed within a cosmic egg. Within it slept a giant Pangu born from the breath of heaven and earth. For 18,000 years, he slumbered until one day he awoke and stretched, shattering the egg. The pure light essence rose to become the heavens. The heavy murky essence sank to become the earth. Fearing heaven and earth might collapse together, Pangu held them apart with his own body. Each day he grew taller, pushing the sky ever higher until heaven and earth were separated by 30,000 miles. His mission was to keep the cosmos in balance. When Pangu's work was complete, the world was formed: mountains, rivers, plants, and animals. But still something was missing. It lacked a being with spirit, intelligence, and soul. It was then that the goddess Nuwa wandered the earth. Seeing its beauty, yet sensing its emptiness, she felt the need to create a creature more noble than all others. Gazing into the yellow river, Nuwa saw her reflection. Inspired, she gathered clay from its banks and shaped it into small figures resembling herself. Then she breathed divine breath into them, and they came alive, able to walk upright, to speak, to think. These were the first humans. Nuwa then infused some with yang energy, making them men strong and bold. To others she gave yin energy, making them women gentle and nurturing. Men and women together surrounded her, dancing and singing, filling the earth with life. As her hands grew weary, Nuwa devised a quicker way. She dipped a rope into the mud, then flicked it so drops of clay scattered across the land. Each drop became a human, spreading people across the world. And to ensure humanity's survival, she taught men and women to pair together to bear children and to nurture future generations. Thus, humankind multiplied and grew. In the ancient myths passed down from east to west, the universe is revealed as an endless expanse, where countless gods and divine beings each carried the sacred mission of creation. Every land, every people, every lineage of mankind was lovingly formed by the hands of a god, shaped in his own likeness, given the breath of life, and guided through the first fragile steps upon the newborn earth. Thus, the story of humanity's origin is not the history of one nation alone, but the great symphony of the cosmos. Each civilization, each legend, is but a fragment of that vast and sacred tapestry. The story of the beginning of mankind on earth, where we were brought into being, not by chance, but by the loving and mighty hand of the divine. And when we lift our eyes to the heavens across the boundless sweep of history, we remember this truth. Mankind is not small nor forgotten for. Within each of us burns a spark of heaven itself, a reminder that from the very dawn of creation, we were destined to belong to the sacred realm. Science proves that God created man. Where did humanity come from? This question has stirred debate for thousands of years. Some believe that mankind was created by God. Does the Bible not clearly state that the Lord himself fashioned man? Does the ancient Shanhai Jing not say that Nuwa molded humans from clay? Yet others put their faith in Darwin's theory of evolution, claiming that humans are descended from apes. In his 19th century work on the origin of species, Darwin asserted that humanity evolved from primates and was not created by God. And yet, more and more discoveries in science and archaeology suggest that the idea man was created by God may not be mere myth, but an evident truth. In the 1960s, at the ancient Astana tombs in Turpan, Xinjiang, China, archaeologists unearthed Tang Dynasty silk paintings known as the Fuxi Nuwa scrolls. These paintings depicted two deities with human heads and serpent bodies intertwined. Strangely, the image bore a striking resemblance to the double helix structure of DNA discovered only a few years earlier in 1953 by Watson and Crick. The discovery shook both the archaeological and genetic communities in the West. What is DNA? It is the great molecule of life. A double helix formed by four bases, a T, G, and C, that function as letters writing the blueprint of every living thing. As the saying goes, dragons beget dragons, phoenixes beget phoenixes, mice beget young that can dig holes. DNA encodes the destiny of every creature. Astonishingly, less than a lump of DNA the size of a sugar cube can store all the world's films and data. Some might dismiss the resemblance between the Fuxi Nuwa scrolls and DNA as coincidence. But let us consider what leading scientists themselves have admitted. Francis Crick, one of DNA's discoverers, was once a staunch Darwinist. Yet after studying DNA, he conceded that life could not have originated naturally on Earth. It was, in his words, nothing less than a miracle. Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, once remarked, "DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created." Anthony Flew, a famous philosopher, and once one of the world's foremost advocates of atheism, ultimately abandoned his position. The complexity of DNA, he admitted, demanded the hand of a designer. And who are these designers, if not the very gods whom civilizations across the ages have proclaimed? In China, legends tell that Nuwa molded humanity from clay. In the Bible, God formed Adam from the dust of the ground, then created Eve from his rib. In Africa, the Shilluk people say that the creator Joe Oak shaped mankind from earth. In Australia, Aboriginal stories tell that the god Pandiger sculpted man from mud and breathed life into him. In Arabia, traditions recount that God sent the angel Azrael to fashion mankind. Despite cultural differences, all point to one truth: mankind was made by the divine. Moreover, Chinese civilization, known as a God-given culture, preserved this connection deeply. In depictions of Fuxi and Nuwa, the two deities often hold a compass and square symbols of law and order. This echoes the teaching of the philosopher Mencius: without a compass and a square, one cannot draw circles or squares. These stories remind us that God not only created humanity, but also established moral law and the standards by which we must live. When Adam and Eve transgressed these boundaries, they were expelled from Eden. If Darwin were correct, then all species should continue to evolve. Yet after millions of years, monkeys remain monkeys, apes remain apes. DNA makes clear, chickens hatch chickens. They will never hatch phoenixes. So striking is this truth that in 1983, UNESCO's International Social Science Journal placed on its cover a comparison of DNA with the Fuxi Nuwa scrolls bearing the profound title, "Creation Gives Birth to All Things." Today, not only many scientists, but even the greatest minds in history, Newton and Einstein themselves, when reaching the very summit of knowledge, both realized the same thing: the final answer to the universe can only point back to God. Newton, the father of classical mechanics, once wrote that it was God who placed the stars in their orbits and keeps the universe running in perfect order. He never saw scientific discovery as a contradiction to faith. Rather, science was a way for mankind to better understand the magnificent work of the Creator. Einstein, the father of relativity, once exclaimed, "The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible." To him, the delicate mathematical laws and the absolute harmony of the cosmos could never be the product of mere chance. He said he believed in Spinoza's God, not a deity who sits upon a throne of judgment, but a supreme being who brought forth the flawless harmony of all creation. Thus, the two greatest minds of humanity, though separated by centuries, arrived at the same conclusion. The deeper one peers into the nature of the universe, the more clearly the invisible hand of God is revealed. And that itself is the most powerful testimony that true knowledge, when pursued to its ultimate end, will always lead mankind back to reverence for the Creator. And yet, paradoxically, while the greatest minds affirm the existence of the Creator, the modern world has been dominated by another doctrine, the theory of evolution. It has been praised as the very foundation of modern science, taught in schools as an unquestionable truth. But after more than a century, mounting evidence suggests that it is not the truth at all, but merely a scientific illusion, one of the greatest mistakes humanity has ever made. The theory of evolution, the greatest scientific mistake of mankind. After reflecting on how Newton and Einstein both concluded that the universe must have a creator, one cannot help but ask, why then, in the modern world, does Darwin's theory of evolution, so full of contradictions, still stand as the foundation of science? According to evolution, in the distant dawn of time, the earth was barren and desolate, without trees, without animals, without even a trace of life. Only endless oceans stretching beyond the horizon. Then one day thunder roared and storms raged across the sea. It is said that lightning struck the towering waves, splitting water molecules and fusing them with nitrogen from the air, accidentally creating amino acids, the so-called building blocks of life. From those tiny molecules, life supposedly began as primitive algae. Over countless random chances, algae became plants and primitive animals, then fish, then amphibians, reptiles, mammals, and finally apes. And from apes, they say humans were born. At first glance, this might sound plausible. Yet when carefully examined, even many scientists admit if such monumental transformations relied solely on random events, the probability of success is virtually zero. One scientist vividly compared it to placing a bag of flour, a box of chocolate, a bag of sugar, and a few eggs on a table, then waiting millions of years for them to accidentally turn into a perfect chocolate cake. In theory, it is not absolutely impossible, but in practice, it will never happen. Furthermore, if we take into account the cycles of Earth's destruction acknowledged today by many scientists, then before such a cake could ever form this planet, would already have been wiped out many times over. And yet, evolution has been exalted as a scientific truth. It was conceived in the West, but its most fervent enforcement was in nations where faith was suppressed. China, the former Soviet Union, and Eastern Europe. In those places, Darwinism was forged into state ideology. Meanwhile, Eastern traditions, whether Buddhist, Taoist, or Confucian, never embraced the idea of apes turning into humans. For millennia, they have believed in heaven's creation, in reincarnation, and in the eternal existence of the soul. A Gallup poll in 1982 revealed that 1 in 4 Americans believed in reincarnation. In the UK, the number was even higher. And if we count those who believe that after death, the soul continues to exist in some form, not necessarily reincarnation, then fully 2/3 of people in Western nations rejected the idea of Darwinian evolution. In other words, the majority of humanity through faith culture and moral intuition has never truly accepted this so-called scientific truth. Instead, more and more are beginning to see it for what it truly is. A scientific illusion, one of the greatest mistakes mankind has ever made. Evidence that refutes Darwin's theory. If the theory of evolution were truly a solid foundation, then after more than a century of research, it should have countless undeniable proofs. Yet paradoxically, the more scientists search, the more flaws they uncover. And often they find evidence that contradicts it outright. The first problem is the missing transitional fossils. Darwin predicted that if his theory was correct, the geological layers of the Earth would be filled with fossils showing gradual transitions. Fish turning into amphibians, reptiles becoming birds, apes evolving into humans. But in reality, after more than 150 years and millions of fossils unearthed, there is still not a single complete transitional chain. The few fragments that have been claimed are either too scarce, hotly debated, or eventually dismissed. Even Stephen Jay Gould, a prominent supporter of evolution, admitted, "The extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record is the most notorious and embarrassing fact about evolution." The second issue lies in mutation and natural selection. Darwin believed that small variations accumulating over time could produce new species. But modern genetics shows that most mutations are harmful, not beneficial. Natural selection can eliminate the weak, but it cannot create entirely new complex structures. Take the human eye as an example. It consists of millions of photoreceptor cells, nerves, and an intricate system of adjustments. No random series of accidents could assemble such perfection. Darwin himself once confessed, "The thought of the eye evolving by natural selection makes me shudder." The third weakness is the origin of life. Evolution theory only addresses how existing species change, but it never answers the most fundamental question: where did life itself come from? Laboratory experiments that synthesize amino acids are crude simulations at best, and they have never demonstrated how simple chemicals could organize into a living cell with a membrane nucleus, DNA, and reproductive systems. Mathematicians have calculated that the probability of this happening by chance is lower than the odds of a tornado sweeping through a junkyard and assembling a fully functioning jet plane. And finally, there is the mystery of humanity itself. If humans are merely descendants of apes, then why are apes still apes, monkeys still monkeys? Why is it that only humans possess higher intelligence, moral reasoning, abstract language, artistic creativity, and religious faith? No evolutionary model has ever explained this profound gap. All of these pieces of evidence, brick by brick, chip away at Darwin's wall. They point to a truth that humanity can no longer ignore. Mankind is not the blind product of random chance and natural selection. Many scientists have publicly rejected the theory of evolution. If evolution were truly a scientific truth, it should have received unanimous agreement from the research community. But in reality, the opposite is true. As early as the 19th century, many scientists contemporary with Darwin expressed doubts. And today, with the rise of molecular biology, genetics, and DNA decoding technology, opposition to the theory of evolution has only grown stronger. Michael Denton, the renowned Australian molecular biologist, declared in his book, Evolution: A Theory in Crisis, when placed under the light of modern discoveries, the theory of evolution completely collapses. It is not a scientific fact, but merely a philosophical doctrine dressed up as science. Jonathan Wells, an American biologist, in his book Icons of Evolution, demonstrated that much of the so-called evidence presented in textbooks for evolution was either fabricated or exaggerated. From Haeckel's infamous embryo drawings to the Piltdown man-ape-man hoax, all were eventually exposed as frauds. Francis Crick, Nobel Prize laureate, and one of the two men who discovered DNA, was originally a firm believer in Darwin. But after studying DNA structure, he was forced to admit life could not have originated randomly on Earth. He argued that a higher intelligence must have seeded life on this planet, and these are not just isolated individuals. In 2001, more than 700 scientists and university professors from around the globe signed a declaration titled A Scientific Dissent from Darwinism. In it, they openly stated, "We are skeptical of claims for the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life." That number has only grown. To date, more than 1,000 scientists have signed on, hailing from prestigious institutions like Cambridge, Princeton, Stanford, and MIT. This shows clearly evolution has never been an unquestionable truth, but a fragile hypothesis shaken from its very foundation. With each passing year, more evidence emerges, and more voices within the scientific world boldly affirm the same conclusion. Life, and humanity itself, is the product of a higher design, an act of creation beyond human imagination. And that creative hand, revered across cultures and ages, has always been called by one sacred name, the Creator. Thus, from the gaps in the fossil record to the contradictions in genetics, and even the growing rejection from within the scientific community itself, Darwin's theory of evolution has gradually revealed its fragile nature. It is not a solid scientific truth, but rather a flawed hypothesis, an ideology inflated to obscure the reality of the Creator. Yet the most dangerous consequence of the theory of evolution is not merely academic. Today it has become the default truth within our education systems. From elementary school to university, millions of students around the world are taught that humanity is nothing more than the descendant of apes, the random byproduct of blind mutations, without God, without a higher purpose to existence. And it is precisely this distorted belief planted in young hearts from childhood that has eroded humanity's most sacred values. Faith in the Creator, reverence for morality, and the very sense of good and evil. This, above all, is the most terrifying legacy of Darwin's theory. How the theory of evolution destroyed human morality. From the very beginning, supporters of evolution did everything possible to defend Darwin's theory, even fabricating evidence to make it appear like real science. Yet history and society have exposed a harsh truth. Evolution is not only flawed as a scientific theory, it also unleashed catastrophic consequences on human morality, especially in the 20th century and continuing into our own day. It is one of the main reasons why human ethics have declined so sharply, like a raging river plunging toward a deadly waterfall with no return. Imagine that current as a furious torrent crashing down into an abyss and ready to swallow every vessel of mankind. We see chaos and violence in today's world, but few realize where this dark current began. That is why French anthropologist André Bourguignon bitterly remarked, "Man has debased himself beneath the animals when he destroys his own kind." He could not understand why something called evolution seemed to make humans worse than beasts. The truth is, Bourguignon had overlooked Darwin's own words. Darwin himself considered the slaughter of fellow humans a natural outcome of evolution. In The Descent of Man, 1871, he wrote, "At some future period not very distant, as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world." Is that not a chilling prophecy? Did it not pave the way for Hitler and the genocides of the 20th century? And yet many hesitate to lay the blame on Darwin. As the poet Tagore once said, "Man is worse than the beasts when he regards himself as an animal." Was this not in fact a direct condemnation of Darwin's legacy? Before Darwin, humanity had never regarded itself as mere animals. Western civilization long believed through the Bible that all people were descendants of Adam and Eve, created by God. But Darwin staged a revolution, reducing mankind to descendants of apes, and further still to just another branch of lower creatures. From then on, in the eyes of atheistic science, man was nothing more than a talking animal. Once man is viewed as an animal, his divine nature is ignored, and only his basest instincts are emphasized. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, described it starkly. Homo homini lupus, man is a wolf to man. Freud saw humans as governed by two primal drives: eros, sexual desire, and thanatos, the instinct for destruction. He was so pessimistic that he believed civilization itself was doomed because mankind had already turned away from God. That was the mindset of a century drenched in war and despair. Leo Tolstoy, the great Russian writer, in his Confession, recalled the moment in his childhood when he first heard the shocking claim, "There is no God." From then on, he and his generation plunged into spiritual crisis, living in a meaningless and decadent society. That year, 1838, became a turning point before its civilization was built upon God. After it, civilization increasingly denied him. When Nietzsche proclaimed God is dead in 1882, Western civilization officially severed its moral foundation, rooted in faith. Into that void, the theory of evolution stepped in, hailed as scientific truth, and embraced fervently by atheistic intellectuals. Yet in reality, it only darkened the moral current, further undermining the very Christian ethical framework that had once grounded Western society, a morality built on the Bible and on faith in the Creator. Evolutionary theory and the brutal legacy of the 20th century. As Darwin's theory of evolution came to be regarded as scientific truth, it not only undermined religious faith, but also provided a so-called rational basis for some of the most brutal ideologies of the 20th century, from the notion of natural selection. Survival of the fittest people derived inhuman social doctrines. In Nazi Germany, Hitler and his followers used Darwinian theory to justify their policy of racial purification. They believed that only the pure Aryan race represented the pinnacle of evolution, while other peoples were inferior races that had to be eliminated. Out of this belief grew concentration camps, gas chambers, and genocides. Horrors that were presented as the logical consequence of a scientific theory twisted into a political weapon. Nor was this confined to Germany. In the atheistic Soviet Union under Stalin, evolution was treated as the philosophical foundation of Marxism-Leninism. They denied God, denied the soul, and viewed human beings as nothing more than products of matter and social evolution. That worldview of atheism cleared the way for bloody purges in which millions of lives were dismissed as superfluous organisms within the machinery of the state, lives that could be destroyed without hesitation. Inside laboratories, evolution also served as an excuse to legitimize cruel experiments on human beings. In Japan, Unit 731 carried out unspeakable atrocities under the banner of science for progress. In the West, the eugenics movement led to the forced sterilization of tens of thousands of people judged unfit by arbitrary genetic standards. At the core of all these tragedies lay one single idea. If human beings are nothing more than animals, then life is no longer sacred. If everything is merely evolution and natural selection, then eliminating the weak. The different or the unfit becomes not only permissible, but even reasonable. The 20th century, with its 2 world wars, concentration camps, genocides, and the annihilation of tens of millions of lives, stands as a tragic testimony that when mankind abandons belief in the Creator and embraces the atheistic dogma of evolution, morality plunges into the abyss. How evolution destroyed Christian morality in Western society. For 2,000 years, the moral foundation of Western civilization was rooted in the teachings of the Bible, both the Old and New Testaments. All of those teachings were built upon faith in the Creator, the one who made heaven and earth, day and night, every living creature, and finally, humankind itself. In the classical education of the West, the book of Genesis was once essential knowledge. Anyone considered educated had to be grounded in it. Yet, as faith in the Creator began to fade, this tradition eroded and eventually vanished. The turning point came in the 19th century, when Darwin's theory of evolution spread like wildfire and became one of the key forces dismantling this foundation. In an article titled "The Evils of Evolution," author Ken Ham analyzed how the acceptance of atheistic evolution caused countless people to abandon their Creator. Without God, His laws are no longer seen as divine principles, but as optional opinions. And once there is no higher authority to fear, the line between right and wrong blurs. Laws and morality become whatever people choose them to be, ever shifting, easily manipulated by desires or power. If one accepts God as the Creator, then life has meaning. Every human being carries intrinsic value created in His image, designed to love and be loved by Him. But if God is replaced with blind chance, then life itself loses its sacred purpose. Morality collapses and humanity becomes a law unto itself. Ken Ham stressed, "What you believe about your origin and destiny determines your worldview. If a society believes humans are created by God, it will cherish divine standards of morality. But if it embraces evolution, then moral corruption naturally follows lawlessness, sexual liberation, homosexuality, abortion, all rise as logical consequences of this worldview." Many Christians today see this decay unfolding. They witness the collapse of Christian morality and the rise of philosophies that rebel against God. They see growing crime, moral anarchy, pornography, abortion, and all manner of corruption. Yet, many do not realize the root cause, a clash of worldviews between belief in divine creation and belief in evolution. Of course, anti-moral ideas existed before Darwin. But once people changed their belief about human origins, their entire view of the world shifted. In Western nations once firmly grounded in Christianity, Darwin's theory of evolution gave atheists the confidence to live according to their desires without shame. One secular scientist even admitted on television, Darwin's theory of evolution has made atheists respectable. Ken Ham shared a sobering story from a classroom in Australia. A teacher told her students she did not believe apes had evolved into humans, because if that were true, the process should still be happening today. A student immediately stood up and replied, "But it is happening, teacher. The Aborigines are just apes still evolving into humans." Ken Ham lamented bitterly. In a world that loudly claims to fight racism, children are being fed the very theories that plant the seeds of racial division. And that poisonous seed is none other than the theory of evolution. How the theory of evolution destroyed Eastern morality. If in the West, the theory of evolution shook the very foundation of Christian morality, then when colonialism spread eastward, it also carried this doctrine along and began to dismantle the age-old belief in heaven as the supreme being. For centuries, people in the East deeply revered heaven, the Creator. In his book Confucianism, scholar Tran Trong Kim wrote, "Heaven is the origin of all things. Man must always revere heaven, and reverence for heaven is the foundation of morality." He pointed out that this sense of awe toward heaven was the earliest root of faith among all peoples. From this perspective, the moral foundations of East and West were once strikingly similar. Both were built upon faith in a creator. Thus, just as evolution eroded the Christian ethic in Europe, it also sowed the seeds of collapse in Eastern moral traditions. Today, people often reduce evolution to a mere branch of biology. Yet in reality, its influence reaches far beyond the natural sciences. A doctrine that can safeguard the moral basis of society may be called upright and true, but one that corrodes morality, that encourages vice and undermines innate goodness. Such a doctrine is nothing less than destructive. And under this lens, evolution has indeed left profound damage. What sets humans apart from animals is precisely the binding force of morality. But evolution undermines that very foundation which had been passed down for millennia, replacing it with the glorification of selfish instincts, treating competition, struggle, and mutual destruction as natural laws. In the past, the West firmly believed that God created man, while in the East, people upheld principles such as human nature is originally good, and 3 feet above your head, the gods are watching. Confucian teachings revolved around cultivating virtue and self-discipline. Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, though thousands of characters, long essentially expounded on the Tao and moral order. The famous story of cutting the book's binding 3 times, in which Confucius carefully studied the I Ching, was also about personal moral cultivation. In other words, for thousands of years, Eastern societies believed that goodness was the essence of human nature. Those consumed by selfishness were deemed unworthy of being called human. And through cultivation and restraint, individuals could become true Junzi, noble men of virtue, devoted to their parents, loyal to their nations, and models admired by their communities. With morality as the guiding principle, benevolence took precedence, society flourished, and civilization endured. But when the theory of evolution swept in, it slowly dismantled these beliefs. And tragically, the harm it inflicted upon humanity did not stop there. How Darwin's theory of evolution corrupted morality in the East. When Western colonialism advanced into the East, it did not come alone. It carried with it Darwin's theory of evolution, and this theory worked relentlessly to undermine the very foundation of Eastern faith, the reverence for heaven, for God himself. For centuries, Eastern people had lived with deep respect for heaven. The Confucian scholar Tran Trong Kim once wrote in his book, "Confucianism, heaven is the origin of all things, and Therefore, people must always revere heaven, for reverence toward heaven is the basis of morality. Indeed, this was the fundamental belief of nearly every ancient people. Morality flows from faith in God, in heaven. That is why, just as Darwin's theory dismantled the Christian moral foundation of the West, it has also corroded the moral foundation of the East. At first glance, many today regard the theory of evolution as a matter of biology alone. But in truth, its influence reaches far beyond science. A true doctrine, if it upholds morality and nourishes the goodness of society, can be called righteous. But a doctrine that destroys morality, undermines human decency, and encourages selfishness cannot be called anything but destructive. And this is precisely what evolution has done. Human beings are set apart from animals not by strength or instinct, but by their capacity for moral restraint, by their ability to live within the bounds of virtue. Yet the theory of evolution has steadily eroded this distinction. It has weakened the ethical traditions that humanity preserved for thousands of years, and in their place, it has promoted selfishness and cruelty. For thousands of years, Westerners firmly believed that God created man and that divine law governed human behavior. In the East, moral teachings emphasized that human nature is originally good, and that above our heads 3 feet away, the gods are watching. Confucianism taught that the purpose of life was to cultivate virtue, to refine oneself. Taoist classics, like the Tao Te Ching, with thousands of words, were all centered on the principles of Tao and Day. Even the story of Confucius, carefully studying the Book of Changes, illustrates the ancient emphasis on moral self-cultivation. In other words, across millennia, both East and West recognized one truth: goodness is the core of human nature. Selfishness was condemned, and those who succumbed to base desires were considered unworthy of being human. The great ideal was to cultivate the self, govern the family, rule the state, and bring peace to the world. Those who embodied virtue, honoring parents, serving their country with loyalty, were revered as models of society. Therefore, removing the influence of the theory of evolution and restoring human morality is not merely a choice. It is a responsibility we are all bound to carry. For this concerns not only you and me, but also the very future survival of our children and grandchildren. The consequences of evolution in modern society, and the only path to redemption. When we look at today's world, it is hard not to shudder. Violence, deceit, greed, and lust overflow everywhere. The family, the very foundation of society, is crumbling day by day. Children are growing up without reverence for heaven, without the ability to distinguish right from wrong. In schools, they are taught, you are nothing more than the result of random mutations, with no God above you, no higher purpose for your existence. And when such distorted beliefs are sown into the hearts of the young, what moral foundation could possibly hold them back? No wonder the values once held sacred are now inverted. Abortion is called a right to choose. Perversion is praised as personal freedom. Violence is justified with selfish reasoning. Greed is no longer condemned, but glorified as ambition. The entire world seems swept up in a whirlwind of lawlessness, where every traditional virtue is trampled underfoot. All of this was foretold in the Bible thousands of years ago. In the New Testament, 2 Timothy chapter 3, 1-5 warns, "In the last days perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying its power." We must ask ourselves, are these words not being fulfilled in our very age? When the world is full of injustice, when hearts grow cold, when morality sinks to its lowest depths, is this not exactly the end time the Bible spoke of? Yet Scripture never leaves humanity without hope. Even in the darkest age, there remains a way of escape. The prophets revealed that in the last days, the Creator would once again descend, bringing His word to save humanity. Those who keep a pure heart, who still fear God and choose righteousness, will be led onto the path of salvation. This means that only by returning to faith, only by reclaiming the responsibility to live according to the standards the Creator set, can mankind have hope of passing through this darkness. Otherwise, humanity will continue its descent into the abyss until everything is swept away in the final judgment. Therefore, rejecting the influence of evolution, reviving traditional morality, and restoring faith in the Creator is not merely a personal choice. It is the responsibility of us all. For this concerns not only you and me, but the very future of our children and their children after them. Looking back, we see that the disastrous consequences of evolution theory in today's society are not so different from what once happened in ancient times, when mankind abandoned morality and believed itself to be nothing more than a product of chance. It slid deeper into corruption, just as in the days of the Nephilim when violence filled the earth. It was this very downfall that moved God to unleash the great flood to cleanse the world. And that stands as a warning for the end times today. The reason the Nephilim were destroyed is the very lesson humanity must heed now. Why the Nephilim and giants were destroyed. A warning for the end time. According to the book of Enoch in the Bible, the Nephilim and the race of giants were not beings created by God in the proper way, but the result of rebellion. When the fallen angels, the Watchers, abandoned their heavenly mandate, they took the daughters of men and gave birth to monstrous offspring. These beings were larger and stronger than humans, but they were also consumed by lust, greed, and violence. The Bible records, "The earth was filled with violence," Genesis 6:11. It was the Nephilim and the giants who corrupted the earth, devouring mankind, drinking blood, teaching forbidden sorcery, forging weapons of war, and spreading chaos everywhere. Humanity itself was drawn into their corruption, chasing after power and indulgence until the world became a living hell. That is why God's wrath was kindled. He did not create man to be a tool of evil, nor would he allow rebellious hybrids to dominate the earth. The great flood was his judgment, a complete cleansing, to wipe away what had become corrupted, to end the existence of the Nephilim and the giants, while preserving one righteous man, Noah, so that humanity could begin again. But this is not just a story of the past. It is a warning for us today. Jesus himself said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man," Matthew 24:37. When modern society overflows with violence, lust, moral decay, and when mankind rejects the Creator while chasing after forbidden knowledge, are we not walking the very same path as the Nephilim and the giants once did? They were destroyed not simply because they were large or different, but because they rejected justice, defied righteousness, and filled the earth with sin. And humanity today, if it does not awaken, will face the same fate. The message that echoes from thousands of years ago has not changed. No one, no matter how strong, no matter how proud, can escape the righteous hand of Almighty God. Nephilim in prophecy in the end time. If the destruction of the Nephilim and the giants in the great flood was a warning for humanity, many Bible scholars believe the story is not yet finished. Ancient texts, and even the Bible itself, contain hints that the shadow of the Nephilim will return in the last days, the end times, as a severe test for mankind. In Genesis 6 chapter 4, there is a small but striking detail. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. The phrase "and also afterward" has been understood by many researchers as a prophetic clue that the Nephilim would not only appear once before the flood, but could re-emerge in later periods of human history. The books of Daniel and Revelation describe the final powers that will rise against God, called the beast, the image, and the kings of the earth who unite. Some scholars suggest these forces are not only symbolic, but also echo the return of the Nephilim spirit, a hybrid force that mixes human and non-human science and sorcery, forbidden knowledge and ruthless power. It is perhaps no coincidence that in our age, science is pushing to alter human genetics, DNA experiment with hybrids cloning, and even dream of redefining what it means to be human. Some ask, could this be the very door through which the Nephilim spirit returns? In Revelation 9, the Apostle John describes the abyss opening and strange creatures pouring out to cover the earth, unleashing chaos never seen before. For many, this passage is a prophecy that in the end times, the world will once again witness the rise of Nephilim-like powers, non-human dark forces that stand against the Almighty, testing mankind to its core. If the Nephilim do return, it would not merely be the reappearance of an ancient race, but a symbol of the resurgence of sin, corruption, and rebellion against heaven itself. And that is the reminder for us today. Stay watchful, for the end times may already be drawing near. Nephilim and UFOs, the giants in modern theory. In the Bible, Nephilim were the offspring of the fallen angels and the daughters of men. In modern times, however, many UFO theories present a strikingly similar scenario under a different name: alien hybrids. According to this view, the so-called abduction phenomenon is not random at all, but rather part of a massive global program of hybridization. Witnesses who return from alleged abductions often describe cold, sterile laboratories where strange embryos are kept alive in tanks. They speak of children, half human, half other, with deep black eyes, pale skin, and unnaturally slender bodies. These beings, they claim, are the product of genetic mixing between humans and some extraterrestrial species. What is remarkable is how closely this mirrors the ancient book of Enoch. Nephilim are described there as beings of unnatural stature and intellect, giants with superhuman strength, who taught mankind forbidden knowledge, sorcery, astrology, and the crafting of weapons. This echoes modern abduction testimonies, where beings often implant strange knowledge into human minds or show them visions of coming global catastrophes. Some theologians have put forward a bold hypothesis that UFOs and aliens are not visitors from distant planets at all, but the Nephilim returning disguised in a new form. Their ancient hybrid project, once wiped out by God in the Great Flood, is now resurfacing under the mask of extraterrestrial science. If this theory holds any truth, then the stories of Nephilim and the warnings of Scripture are not merely about the distant past. They may be prophecies unfolding before our eyes. And once again, humanity is faced with a grave choice. Will we recognize the deception and turn back to God? Or will we repeat the same mistake, allowing the Nephilim to rise again, spreading chaos and leading the world toward destruction? From this perspective, we see a striking coincidence. What modern people call aliens and their alleged hybridization projects are almost identical to what the Bible described about the Nephilim thousands of years ago. So could it be that the strange lights in the sky, the mysterious flying saucers, and even the testimonies of hybrid beings are not really visitors from other planets, but rather the return of the Nephilim, disguised under a new mask? This raises a profound question. Do aliens truly exist, or is it merely a grand deception designed to distract humanity from the divine truth that Scripture has revealed since the very beginning? Do aliens really exist? After discussing the Nephilim and the hybrid theories, the next inevitable question arises: do aliens truly exist? Since the 1980s, humanity has been searching for extraterrestrial civilizations using aerospace technology that advanced in the wake of Star Wars. American scientists have continuously transmitted signals into space, hoping to make contact with alien life. At the same time, countless films and TV series about extraterrestrials have been produced, fueling public curiosity even more. For a long time, people believed that alien civilizations would soon be discovered. Yet after decades of exploration, space research has yielded no definitive results. Scientists have suggested 4 possibilities. First, interstellar travel may not yet be possible for alien civilizations. Second, they may deliberately avoid contact with humanity. Third, they may have only recently emerged and need more time before reaching out. and fourth Earth has already been visited, but humans simply do not know it. Over the years, there have been countless reports of UFOs and alien encounters. Strangely, none of them have been fully verified. Evidence either vanishes mysteriously, is deliberately hidden, or is reduced to blurry, ambiguous photos and documents. Some argue that human civilization itself has always been under the influence of higher beings who control the pace of our progress. There are even accounts that aliens once cooperated with Hitler during World War II, helping Nazi Germany develop advanced weapons and even flying discs that were centuries ahead of their time. But with Germany's defeat, the technology was lost. Later, aliens supposedly turned to the United States, where aerospace research was booming. This collaboration was said to involve not only direct encounters, but also telepathic transmissions of knowledge. Rumors also claim that several world powers have secretly signed agreements with extraterrestrials, and that international treaties exist to deliberately conceal the truth from the public. Paul Hellyer, former Canadian Minister of Defense, has publicly stated many times that aliens are real, and that they have been visiting Earth for thousands of years to observe human civilization. Given his position, Hellyer would have had access to sensitive information, making his claims even more compelling. According to him, there are more than 80 alien species, some of which look nearly identical to humans, so much so that they can disguise themselves and live among us without being detected. Hellyer described 4 main groups: a mysterious race from the Atlas star system existing in higher dimensions beyond human perception; highly advanced beings from the Orion constellation, said to have influenced ancient civilizations like Egypt and the Maya; the Andromedans, over 2 meters tall, often called the Small Blues; the Small Grays from Orion. The most familiar image of aliens in movies: small, frail bodies, large black eyes, smooth gray skin, and considered to be of the lowest rank among alien species. In truth, calling them all aliens may not be entirely accurate. Some may not come from other planets at all, but from other dimensions within Earth itself. Still, because humanity has no clear understanding of who or what they truly are, the name alien has stuck. If these mysterious beings that we call aliens truly exist, then what role do they play in the greater story of human history? Are they simply visitors from distant stars? Or could they in fact be the very entities described in the Bible and other ancient texts thousands of years ago? Some biblical scholars believe that what we now call UFOs, or extraterrestrials, may actually be the Nephilim, or their descendants, hybrid beings once destroyed in the Great Flood, now seeking to return as a test for humanity in the end times. Do aliens exist in the Bible? For centuries, this question has stirred deep debate. The Bible does not use modern words like UFO or alien. Yet within the pages of the Old Testament are passages that modern readers cannot help but associate with beings from another world. In Genesis 6:1-4, we find a mysterious account. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. They were the heroes of old men of renown. This brief passage opens up one of Scripture's most enduring enigmas. Who were the sons of God, and what exactly were the Nephilim? Traditional interpretation holds that they were fallen angels, heavenly beings, who rebelled, took human wives, and fathered a race of giants, mighty but violent and corrupt. Their existence spread bloodshed and immorality across the earth, provoking God to unleash the great flood to wipe them away, sparing only Noah and his family. The Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text excluded from the biblical canon, paints an even darker picture. It says that 200 Watchers angels, sent to observe humanity, swore an oath on Mount Hermon to rebel together. They not only took human wives, but also taught mankind forbidden knowledge, forging weapons, casting spells, astrology, and sorcery. From this rebellion came the Nephilim, ferocious giants who drank blood and filled the earth with violence. Enoch adds that when the Nephilim died, their souls did not rest, but became wandering evil spirits, the origin of demons in Jewish tradition. In the modern age of science fiction, however, some have reinterpreted these accounts through a different lens. They ask, what if the sons of God were not angels at all, but advanced beings from another planet? Could the Nephilim have been the result of a genetic hybrid project between humans and extraterrestrials? Would that not explain their immense size, their extraordinary power, and their knowledge that far surpassed early mankind? Could it be that the sudden leaps in metallurgy, sorcery, and astrology recorded in the Book of Enoch were not mystical at all, but technological transfers from beyond the earth? These two interpretations, one from traditional scripture and one from modern ancient alien theories, seem to exist side by side. The Bible says the Nephilim were the offspring of spiritual rebellion, while the alien hypothesis claims they were proof of extraterrestrial intervention. Yet both lead us to the same conclusion that powerful beings beyond human comprehension once interfered with human history, leaving behind devastation. In the end, the question is not whether we call them fallen angels or aliens. What matters is the enduring message of Scripture when humanity turns away from the Creator and pursues forbidden knowledge. The result is chaos and moral collapse, just as it was in the days of the Nephilim before the flood. And perhaps that is why some biblical scholars believe the Nephilim may return in the last days as humanity's final test. The Pascagoula alien abduction, Mississippi. On the night of October 11th, 1973, around 11 p.m., two men rushed frantically into the police station of the small town of Pascagoula, Mississippi. They were out of breath, their faces pale, their eyes wide with panic, unable to form coherent words. The older man kept muttering, "America. America is about to be invaded." The officers were stunned. Who would dare invade America? What on earth were these men talking about? Instead of dismissing them as drunk or delusional, the night shift officers immediately led them into a private interrogation room. There they listened to one of the strangest accounts ever recorded in U.S. police files. The two men were Charles Hickson, 42, a war veteran, and Calvin Parker, an 18-year-old who had just started working at the local shipyard. That evening, after finishing work, they went fishing near an abandoned shipyard by the river. The night was calm, the water still, until a strange buzzing sound suddenly came from behind them. When they turned around, they saw something beyond belief. A massive oval-shaped craft glowing with a blue light as large as a truck, hovering less than a meter above the ground. From inside the craft, three beings floated out. Hickson and Parker described them as small gray creatures about 5 feet tall. Their wrinkled gray skin looked unnatural, their faces nearly expressionless, with only slits for eyes and mouths. Their bodies were awkwardly built, their hands like crab claws, and their legs fused together like stumps, more like elephant feet than human ones. One of the creatures approached Parker and touched him. Terrified, the young man immediately fainted. From that moment on, the rest of the story comes from Hickson's testimony alone. He said the other two beings quickly grabbed him. Hickson, once a soldier trained in combat and karate, instinctively tried to resist. But before he could strike back, a sharp pain surged through his left arm. His body went completely numb, and he could no longer move. The creatures lifted him effortlessly and carried him aboard the craft. The moment he entered, he felt as though gravity itself had vanished. Inside, it was brilliantly lit, yet he could see no source of light. Suspended in midair, only his eyes could still move. Then he saw a giant eye about the size of a soccer ball floating from the wall and scanning his body up and down, left and right, as though examining him. Once the scan was complete, the eye retreated back into the wall. Several of the beings stood silently nearby. Overcome with fear, Hickson shouted, "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The beings seemed to respond, but to his ears it was only a strange buzzing noise, incomprehensible. Hickson couldn't remember what happened next. The next thing he knew, the glowing craft had vanished, and he found himself lying back on the ground near the fishing pier. Parker stood a short distance away, his eyes vacant, as though his soul had left his body. The two men stumbled back to their car, debating what to do. Hickson kept drinking to calm his nerves, while Parker sat and wept. In America, the UFO craze had been strong ever since the Roswell crash of 1947, with constant reports in newspapers and magazines. Hickson, regaining some composure, thought to himself that they must have encountered extraterrestrials. He decided to report it to the military. There happened to be an Air Force base not far from town, so they called only to be told bluntly, "We're not accepting such cases at this time." Then the line was cut. The two men were stunned. They next went to a local newspaper, but the night watchman told them reporters wouldn't arrive until morning. If it was important, they'd have to wait until then. It was already close to 11 p.m. With no other options, Hickson and Parker made their final decision. They would report it to the police. And so, they walked into the Pascagoula police station. Lie detector test at the police station. The men who listened to their story in that small room that night were Police Chief Fred Diamond and Officer Ryder. After hearing it all, they said, "You two wait here for a while," and then stepped outside, left alone. Hickson and Parker began talking about what they had just experienced. Parker said that he had been paralyzed and unable to move. Hickson replied, "I always knew they were beings from another world. I never thought this would happen to me." But what they didn't realize was that the two officers had deliberately walked out. They had set up a trick. That small room was in fact an interrogation room. In the corner, a small device was quietly recording. Everything Hickson and Parker said to each other was captured on tape. After sending the two men home later that night, the police gathered around to listen. Based on their many years of handling cases, they felt the two men were not lying. Both looked utterly terrified, far too convincing to be an act. If their acting had truly been that good, they would have gone to Hollywood long ago, not stayed as shipyard workers in this remote town. Moreover, with no outsiders present, their conversation showed no inconsistencies. They even described in greater detail how the UFO door opened and how the gray beings floated down. If they had not really gone through it, it would have been nearly impossible to fabricate such a story. But if it was true, then it was terrifying. Perhaps aliens really did intend to infiltrate Earth. The police quickly reported the matter up the chain of command. Within just a few days, the case spread from local papers to major outlets around the world. That hidden recording later became the smoking gun that convinced many the Pascagoula abduction was real. Another smoking gun. And in fact, there was more than one smoking gun. In 2018, British UFO investigator Philip Mantle revealed that he had found another piece of hard evidence, a report from an authoritative source. Less than 36 hours after the abduction, two leading figures in the American UFO research community jumped into the investigation: Dr. Alan Hynek, formerly with the U.S. Air Force, and Professor James Harder of the University of California. During their inquiry, Hickson and Parker passed lie detector tests, underwent hypnosis, and cooperated with physical examinations. Out of privacy concerns, the two institutions never released the detailed findings. But in press conferences, they both stated clearly that they believed the men's testimony. So what convinced them? Years later, Mantle discovered the answer in old archives, the original medical report written by Professor Harder. It recorded that Hickson had 3 needle marks on his left arm, while Parker had injuries to the sole of his left foot. The report also included photographs of the wounds. Mantle explained that neither Hickson nor Parker even knew such documents existed, and the photos had never been made public. Yet they matched perfectly with what the men had reported that night. Hickson said he felt pain in his arm, and Parker said his foot had been clamped. The scars in the photos corresponded exactly. Mantle, who had studied UFO cases for decades, said he had never seen such injuries documented by recognized experts before. This report and these photos, he concluded, were priceless. A true smoking gun. Other witnesses. Of course, to convince the public, physical evidence alone wasn't enough. there had to be witnesses. The fishing pier was not far from the main road. Around 9 p.m., there were still many cars passing by. With such a huge glowing object hovering in the sky, could no one else have seen it? Unfortunately, at the time, aside from Hickson and Parker, no third witness came forward. This became ammunition for skeptics who claimed the abduction was fake. But 8 years later, in 1981, new testimony emerged. Pastor Emmanuel P. Sigalas broke his silence. On Thursday evenings, Sigalas often preached to men with drinking habits. October 11, 1973, happened to be a Thursday. That night, he was driving with a police officer named Raymond and a young woman along Highway 90 near the Pascagoula Pier. Suddenly, they noticed a cylindrical craft hovering to the left of their car, seemingly following them. At first, Sigalas thought it must be a military helicopter from a nearby base. But soon it became clear this was something else. When they sped up, it sped up. When they slowed down, it slowed down too. It never overtook them, simply paced the car. Was someone trying to scare them? Military aircraft don't behave like that to civilians. Just as their nerves were stretched to the limit, the craft suddenly turned and vanished toward the very pier where Hickson and Parker had been abducted. In interviews, Sigalas said he didn't know what the object was or what beings might be inside, but he believed the shipyard worker's story. And he wasn't alone. There were 2 other witnesses in the car, both trustworthy. Later, more witnesses came forward, a retired soldier, some local residents, all claiming they too had seen the glowing craft that night. Finally, on June 22, 2019, the city of Pascagoula erected a historical marker at the pier describing the abduction in detail. In a way, it was official recognition of the case. And yet the Pascagoula story was not over. Like many alien abduction cases, this one too would have a sequel. After the story spread across the United States and internationally, the lives of Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker were never the same. They were no longer just ordinary shipyard workers. They had become the focus of newspapers, television, and the entire UFO research community. Charles Hickson, the older man, eventually grew accustomed to this unwanted fame. He gave countless interviews and even wrote a book to recount his experience. Until the end of his life, Hickson firmly maintained that what happened that night was true, that he had been taken aboard by extraterrestrial beings and subjected to some kind of medical examination. But for Calvin Parker, the 18-year-old, that night, it was a nightmare with no end. For decades, Parker avoided the media, refused interviews, and tried not to speak of the terrifying memory. He said that night left him deeply traumatized, plagued by anxiety, sleepless nights, and the constant feeling of being watched. Strangely, as the years went on, Parker began to recall additional details that he hadn't spoken of in 1973. He later claimed that when he fainted, he didn't lose consciousness completely. Instead, he too had an encounter inside the craft. Parker described being taken into a brightly lit room where a being appeared different from the small gray entities. This one was larger, more human-like, and seemed to be in control. According to Parker, it did not speak aloud, but communicated directly into his mind like a form of telepathy. Parker also remembered a machine with a metallic arm scanning his body, and he felt as though his memories were being read. The experience left him horrified and deeply violated. During the 1990s and early 2000s, many UFO researchers sought him out. Eventually, Parker agreed to publish a book, Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, 2018, revealing everything he remembered, including details he had once kept secret for fear of ridicule. The book reignited controversy. Many UFO enthusiasts hailed the Pascagoula case as one of the most credible alien abduction stories ever recorded, supported by physical evidence, police recordings, and multiple investigators. Skeptics, however, argued that Parker's later memories might have been influenced by suggestion hypnosis or the spread of UFO culture. Still, the Pascagoula encounter remains one of the classic cases in UFO history. In 2019, when the city erected a historical marker at the site of the abduction, both Hickson, who had passed away in 2011, and Parker, still alive at the time, were honored as the central witnesses to one of the most mysterious events of the 20th century. In his later years, Parker never backed down. In one interview, he stated, "I don't expect everyone to believe me. I only want people to understand that we really lived through this. And if they came to us once then, I believe they're still watching humanity somewhere out there in the sky." The Pascagoula abduction was not just a bizarre tale told by two unknown shipyard workers. It became a milestone in UFO research, recalled decades later as one of the most compelling cases in history. From the secret police interrogation tapes, to the strange wounds on their bodies, to independent eyewitnesses who reported seeing a craft in the sky that very night. Each piece of evidence fits together like fragments of a puzzle, making it difficult to dismiss the story with a skeptical smile. Yet, what makes the Pascagoula incident most haunting is not only the evidence, but the emotional scars left on the two men. One chose to confront it openly, recounting the experience for the rest of his life. The other chose silence, carrying the terror like a wound in his soul for decades. That contrast shows us something profound. Whether UFOs and aliens are real or not, the experience was undeniably etched into their fate. And even now, the question still hangs in the air like an unsolved riddle. What exactly did they encounter on that night in Pascagoula? A carefully orchestrated hoax? A shared hallucination on a quiet riverbank? Or was it in fact living proof that out there beyond our world, other beings are watching us, appearing for only a fleeting moment before vanishing again, leaving behind scars, fear, and questions no one can ever truly answer? The alien abduction in the White Mountains. Just 8 years before the Pascagoula incident, America was shaken by another event, one that echoed even louder: the abduction of Betty and Barney Hill. This was the very first case in modern history where the concept of alien abduction was openly described in detail, sparking a storm in the media, among scientists, and across international public opinion. On the night of September 19, 1961, Betty and Barney Hill were driving home to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, after a short vacation in Canada. While crossing the lonely road through the White Mountains, they noticed a strange light moving in the sky. At first, they assumed it was a star or an airplane. But the more they watched the stranger, it shifted directions, darted forward, then stopped, suddenly moving in ways no aircraft they knew could. Uneasy Barney pulled the car over and used binoculars. To his horror, he saw a massive disc-shaped craft with glowing windows and inside shapes of strange beings moving about. In that moment, he realized they were being watched. Betty panicked, urging her husband to drive away. They sped down the road, but a metallic humming noise filled the air, and suddenly, both of them slipped into a hazy, dreamlike state. When they regained awareness, they found themselves nearly 60 kilometers further down the highway. Neither of them could recall what had happened during the missing 2 hours. They later called it missing time. In the following days, both began experiencing disturbing symptoms. Barney was plagued by nightmares, while Betty dreamt repeatedly of being taken aboard a craft where strange beings subjected them to bizarre medical examinations. In her dream, Betty was even shown a star map, which years later, an amateur astronomer identified as matching the Zeta Reticuli star system 39 light-years from Earth. Haunted by trauma, the couple sought help from Dr. Benjamin Simon, a clinical hypnotist. Under separate hypnosis sessions, both Betty and Barney described the same chilling account being led onto a spacecraft, examined by small beings with large black eyes, eerily similar to the little gray aliens that would later dominate UFO lore. They described tissue samples being taken, neurological and reproductive tests being performed. At one point, Barney became so emotional that he broke down crying during hypnosis, convincing everyone present of the depth of his fear. When recordings of these sessions were released, America erupted. Many believe this was undeniable evidence that extraterrestrials had abducted humans. Skeptics argued it was stress and imagination at play. But regardless of perspective, the Hills story became the very first classic case of alien abduction, laying the foundation for thousands of reports to follow. What makes the White Mountains case so haunting is not only the details, but also the Hills themselves. They never sought fame or profit, never wanted the spotlight. They were an ordinary middle-class couple from a quiet town with nothing to gain and everything to lose. Why would they invent such a bizarre tale, knowing it would bring skepticism, ridicule, and lifelong scrutiny? That is why even today, the White Mountains abduction remains one of the most compelling and disturbing mysteries in UFO history. But the greatest question still lingers. Why would these mysterious beings abduct humans at all? Were they simply observing us as specimens? Studying us as experiments? Or is there a deeper plan beyond human imagination? If Betty and Barney's accounts were true, then humanity may be just one tiny piece of a vast cosmic puzzle manipulated by unseen hands. And that's where the true horror lies. We don't know if they came to protect us, to warn us, or to control us. If you too wrestle with this question and want Sleep Codex to dive deeper into the world of UFOs and alien encounters, leave a comment below. Perhaps in our next video, we'll peel back another layer of this great mystery. Tonight's journey has carried us back through forbidden pages to a time when the name Nephilim echoed like a warning. These giants, proud and violent, once spread corruption across the earth until the great flood swept them away. Yet their memory has never vanished. It lingers in the Book of Enoch, whispered through ancient civilizations, and even today, it stirs unease in those who dare to ponder it. Perhaps this is a sign for us in these end times, that when mankind forgets the Creator chasing after forbidden desires and knowledge, the outcome may be no different than in the days of the Nephilim. Now close your eyes and let that quiet warning settle deep within. Hold fast to truth, compassion, and forbearance, for only through virtue can we avoid repeating the fate of the giants who were destroyed. As the glow of the screen fades away, allow your mind to release, to drift into stillness. The mysteries remain waiting for the day they will be revealed. But tonight, rest peacefully, with the quiet assurance that the Creator is watching, shielding, and loving you. Sleep well, and until next time, may your dreams carry you gently through the vastness of eternity here with Sleep Codex.